In this video, I'm going to walk through a full app build using Claude Code from start to finish. And if you've been using tools like Lovable, Bolt, or Replit to build your apps and you're getting stuck and you want to get started with Claude Code, then this is going to be the video that you want to watch. I'm going to walk through the entire process from choosing the right tech stack to building the app foundations to setting up the database, authentication, payments, and deploying it to a domain using Vercel. And there's going to be very minimal editing through this, so you're going to see the entire process from start to finish. This is definitely one that you're going to want to save for later and watch in bits if you're building step by step. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Chris, and for the last 15 years I've been designing apps and advising startups on product and design. And if you want to see more stuff like this in your feed, just click like and subscribe down below before we get started. And with that said, let's get into building our full application using Claude Code.
Build great product. Build great product.
So let's start building our app with Claude Code. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to go through all of these steps in this video. And I know this looks long, but this isn't going to be that difficult to go through step by step. And you can follow it through the entire video with Claude Code as well to build your app idea as you go. We're basically going to go through planning, some Claude Code basics and how to get set up with Claude Code, your first prompt, how to set up your app, how to set up GitHub for your project, then to test your database, test authentication, add payments, design your app, add the features for your app, create a landing page, which we're going to do in a separate tool actually for this specific app project. I'm going to show you some reasons why you might keep it in the project or do it separately. We're going to then do some testing on our full app project. And then we're going to talk about other tools that you can integrate here, like analytics, email sending, all of that sort of stuff. And then we're going to actually deploy our app to a live domain using Vercel. So what is the structure that we're going to do here? Well, we're going to keep it very, very simple for this app. So we're basically going to have a landing page, which we're going to build in a different tool. We're going to then go through to a sign up form, which is going to be done using Clerk. So that will be a sign up or a login page. And this will have all of these things. This is all covered by Clerk automatically, so we don't have to worry too much about that. We're then going to add payments where we want to basically prompt the user to sign up to our app. And we're going to do this by prompting them to sign up to a free trial that then converts them into a paid user. And we're going to make this kind of like a mandatory step to keep it really simple so that you have to sign up to the free trial to get into the app. And then you can manage your subscription once you get inside the app. This is just a really simple setup that I like to do straight away. So you have one path into your app that all users are going to go through, and then you can kind of change that later if you want to kind of tweak how you're doing the pricing. The user is then going to be able to get into the app and actually use all of the app features. And we're going to need to make sure that we cover account management and subscription management here as well, which we're going to do with some of the tools that we're using in our tech stack. Now, before we get stuck in, let's just do some very quick app planning. Now, I like to go into a bit more detail with this generally, but we're just going to go through this really quickly here for this idea that I'm going to show you how I've built it going step by step. And in my course, in my school community, it actually breaks down the planning kind of process in a lot more detail over a lot more lessons to help you kind of make your app idea just incredibly good and validate it in the market. But we're just going to figure out these 5 things to start off with. And these are the kind of 5 things that I like to start with if you're not kind of doing any detailed planning, which is basically who is it for? So the app that we're going to be building today is an app that I want to create basically to help vibe coders plan their app projects and to help people working on apps that are already building them in tools like Lovable to actually create features with more success, avoid any bugs, and just like have that planning layer basically around building apps. So it's to help vibe coders and app builders to plan and build their app with faster and with less bugs. So that's who it's for. So that kind of answers like our what problem does it solve a little bit. So we want to think about, are we solving a problem with this app? So the problem is like managing context between sessions, storing planning information, because this is kind of being stored in just like markdown files in someone's project in the code base at the moment, which can be useful, but it's also maybe not like an ideal way of managing that kind of planning part of building an application. And also like build issues, bugs, etc. So I think there's a bunch of problems that we're solving here. The core problem is like basically managing this context and planning your app across multiple sessions and kind of building it faster and helping you actually have visibility of like how to manage that context properly. So how does it do this? We're going to add some key features in the MVP. So we're going to add like basically information for all aspects of your app. And we're going to also add feature tracking and context. And we're also going to add like a knowledge feature here as well for documentation, etc. So this is going to have all of the information that we need to kind of build an app successfully. What is the pricing model here as well? So we need to define a pricing model up front that we're going to do for this app. So I like to keep it really simple to start off with. So again, we're going to basically just do a free trial period, which will probably be like 3 days, and then a paid monthly subscription to start off with. And we might introduce annual later. I always think it's good to start off with a monthly subscription because then if the app doesn't work out, even if you have some paying customers or you want to move on to a new project, it actually makes it a little bit easier rather than giving people the option for an annual plan up front. That can be quite a commitment to a long-term project for someone if they've paid for that to use that software. You might think, well, why wouldn't you want to continue working on it if someone has paid for an annual plan? But sometimes if you're building something, you maybe get a few users on it, but you realize at some point that it's not the right path forwards. And so then you might want to move on to something else. And I think just like monthly gives you an easier starting point for that. So we're going to do free trial with a paid monthly subscription. And then what is it called? So I bought a domain called scribe.dev. So it's going to be called Scribe. And Scribe is going to be your go-to kind of planning and build partner for building any application using any sort of vibe coding or AI coding tool, whether that's Lovable, Replit, Cursor, Claude Code, whatever it is. So for this app build, what tech stack are we going to use here? And these are all the component pieces of your app. Basically the app kind of foundations that you need to know to kind of piece together to build a working application. We're going to be building a web application here. So this is the same sort of application that you would build if you were building in Lovable or Replit or Bolt or any of those tools. But because we're using Claude Code to build, we need to know a little bit more about the tools that we're piecing together to actually make our app work. And so these are broken down into these categories. So we've got the front end, which is basically the visual layer, the layer that you see on the screen that covers all of your interactions and logic. The kind of back end, which is where all the functions are happening and everything is being worked out behind the scenes, that is sending information back to the front end to display to the user. The database, where we're storing all of the information that a user might be saving against their account, because they're going to be logging in and logging out and signing up to accounts on our app. We want to basically store any data there that they're creating in their app, and that is stored in a database. We've also got authentication, which is how we allow users to log in and sign up to our app. We're going to have payments, which is how we accept payments in our app as well. And we're going to have a tool that we use to deploy our app, and also APIs. So if you don't know what an API is, basically an API is like an external tool or a service that you can use where you basically send information to it. The API does something behind the scenes and then it sends the information back to your app. So if you want to use AI functionality in your app, for example, you would add an AI API. So we use like the Claude or the OpenAI API here to actually do that AI functionality. So for the front end, we're going to be using React, Next.js and Tailwind. And we're using Next.js because this is kind of a go-to framework for web applications, and AI knows it really, really well. There's a ton of data that it's been trained on in Next.js applications, and the models are just very good at building them. For backend, we're going to be using Convex, and for our database, we're going to be using Convex as well. It's a little bit like Supabase, but it's written in your code. You also get a dashboard on their website, which makes it really, really easy to see what's going on, and it makes it easy to make changes as well. For authentication, we're going to be using Clerk, which is basically a go-to tool for like authentication that can scale up to thousands and thousands of users. And this is kind of one of the industry standard pieces of tech for authentication. For payments, we're going to be using Polar, which is basically a payment provider that acts as a merchant of record. So they handle all the international tax, which is perfect if you're building a software application where users can come from anywhere around the world, which you don't kind of get that piece if you use Stripe. For deployment, we're going to be using Vercel, which is again an industry standard for deploying app front ends. Our back end is going to be deployed on Convex, and our front end is going to be deployed with Vercel, and that's going to be the part where you can kind of go on a website URL and access the application. And then for our APIs, we're going to be using the Claude API for any AI functionality in our app. We're going to go through building this app with Claude Code today. So now that we've done planning, let's get stuck into Claude Code basics. I'll show you how to set it up, and then we'll get started building our app with our first prompt. So this is Claude Code here. I've just gone to claude.com/product/Claude-code. And all you have to do to set up Claude Code on your computer is basically to copy this command here to the clipboard. So just click this copy to clipboard icon, and then all you have to do is run a terminal. So open a terminal on your machine and then paste that command, press enter, and that will install Claude Code on your computer. Now the terminal might be a little bit scary. We're actually going to use a couple of different ways of using Claude Code through this app build. So you don't just have to use the terminal here, but you do have to use the terminal here just to install Claude Code on your machine. So now that we've got Claude Code installed, we're going to go and get Cursor. So if you don't have Cursor already, Cursor is going to be the tool that we use to build our app in, and we're going to run Claude Code in Cursor basically. If you don't know what Cursor is basically an IDE, which is an integrated development environment. You don't need to know what that means. It's basically an application that you can use on your computer to write code using AI and also to preview your app as you're building it. It's one of the best tools for building applications with AI, and I think the features that it has pairs really well with Claude Code, which is why I'm going to be doing this using Claude Code and Cursor for this tutorial. But you can use Claude Code with any other IDE like VS Code, or you can just use it directly in the terminal if you really want to as well. That is a more complex way of using it compared to this. So get Cursor if you haven't for the purposes of this video. And then once you've got Cursor, we're going to open up Cursor, and then we're going to create a new project. All you have to do is click open project here, and you just create a new folder for this project. So I'm going to create a folder called Scribe. We're going to open that, and then I'm just going to maximize this to this size. And then this is the view that you're going to get when you start in Cursor. And you might think, well, where is everything here? Where is the stuff? Well, basically what this has opened is an empty folder, because what we're going to be doing is creating code files in this folder. And if you jump over to the editor view here, so my setup has changed a little bit here actually, but what you're going to get is you're going to get two views at the top here, where you have this agents view and this editor view. In the agents view, you have your agents on the right hand side, or it might be on the left hand side for you depending on how it's set up. But I've got my agents here on the right hand side, which is basically a chat box, which is very similar to any other sort of AI coding tool or vibe coding tool that you've used. You might have used Lovable or Bolt or Replit or any of these tools and be looking to get into Claude Code or Cursor. This is basically just the setup that we have here. And we're going to actually be running a browser preview inside of Cursor to see our app as we're building it. Now, we're not actually going to use this agent chat in Cursor, and we're not going to be creating any new agents because we're going to be doing this entirely using Claude Code. So I am just going to hide those for now. I'm just going to get those out of the way. And then in the editor view, just to show you what this looks like, and just to open this side panel here, the editor view, now you can see there's the title Scribe up here. This is basically our folder with all of our files in, but there's no files in it at the moment because we haven't started our project. So we're going to start building our project. We're going to go back to the agents view just with this screen here. So on this editor view, there's one thing that we're going to do before we start using Claude Code, and that is just to install the Claude Code extension in Cursor. And the reason that we're doing this is because this is a more friendly user interface than using the terminal. So if you go into extensions, which is this kind of squares like icon up here, and find Claude Code, and then just install Claude Code for VS Code. That will enable you to run Claude Code in its own sort of user interface inside of Cursor. You can use it in the terminal. We might have to use it in the terminal for some parts of this, but for the most part, we're just going to be using it in the Claude Code extension in Cursor. So once you've got that installed, all we're then going to do is switch back to this agent view here, and I'm going to go to this dotted menu up here, and I'm going to click Claude Code open, and that is just going to open Claude Code for me. I'm going to close this on the left hand side. So now all we have in the middle of our screen in Cursor is just Claude Code, and this is just a chat box at the bottom that is very familiar if you've used any sort of AI tool, any sort of AI chat tool or vibe coding tool. There are a few key commands that are worth knowing with Claude Code before we get started, and these are all accessed by using /, and then you get a menu here which kind of gives you all of the different options for commands that you can do. The ones that we're going to be using for the most part are new conversation and clear conversation, attaching a file, and then you're going to need to log in also to get started. So you need to log in to your Claude account, or you can use the Claude API for this. But if you have a Claude account, that's going to be the way that you're going to be able to get the most out of Claude Code. Even if you just have a pro account, you're going to get a bunch of usage of Claude Code on that. You can also select the model, and there's a bunch of other stuff that you can do here as well. So we'll get into those as we kind of go through this. But for the most part, all we need to know is new conversation, clear conversation, attach file, and then select model so that we can select the AI model that we're using. For the most part, we're going to be using Opus 4.5 for this, but those are the kind of key things to get started. So let me log in to Claude Code here so that this is set up and ready to go. And basically you just connect your Claude.ai subscription. I'm going to authorize Claude Code to access my subscription, and let's go back to Cursor. We copy this authentication code and then go back to Cursor, paste it in here, click continue, and that will connect your Claude account to Cursor. And now you've got Claude Code up and running in Cursor. We can now put in our first prompt to start building our app. So now we've got Claude Code up and running in Cursor. I'm going to break down the first prompt that we're going to put in here to build our application. And this prompt that I've created is pretty in-depth. So this is my prompt here for Scribe, the app that we're going to create. And I want to break it down and the key components here. You don't have to write a first prompt that's this long, but I like to go really, really detailed with my prompts to make sure that the AI is going to get as close to kind of my vision that I have in my head for the product. Now, I've worked with apps and designed apps for the last 15 years, so I kind of know exactly what I want to get out of it. And you can be a bit more vague when you're prompting Claude Code and get Claude Code to actually figure out what it needs to do with the application for you instead of being this detailed. But the kind of key things that I'm calling out here is first, I'm calling out the tech stack that we're going to use. So we're going to build our app with Next.js using React and Tailwind, with Clerk for authentication and Convex.dev for database and backend. That gives Claude Code context of how we're going to build it. The app should be a planning app for vibe coders and app builders who are planning their app and tracking progress. That's the context about our app. What is it? Who is it for? What problem does it solve? I'm also outlining the architecture for the app here as well. So I want the app to store information about apps, and then it's going to have this level of navigation. It's going to have these pages in it. The AI chat is going to come out from a left-hand panel. And after that, I'm going to break down the key pages in the application and then the user journey for the application as well. So these are the key pages that I want to create. I'm going to have a PRD, a tech stack, a knowledge, and a features page. And when the user signs up, they're going to go through these steps. They're going to basically create their first app, choose their tech stack, create their app project. And then on each of these pages within an app, here's what you're able to do. Here are the features and how it works. I've kind of explained those in detail there. I've also added in here the technology that I want to use, so that any APIs that I want to use in this as well. So there's a piece in here around AI kind of chat, which I'm going to be using Claude for. So we're going to use the Claude API for that. And there's a piece in here around scraping data from websites as well, which we're going to use the Firecrawl API for. So those are the two APIs that we're going to be using here. I've also added in a little bit about design, but just very, very basic. So the UI should be minimal and clean with plenty of white space, rounded border radius, and soft shadows. And I've also added in some fonts that I want to use here as well from Google Fonts. So you can call that stuff out specifically in this first prompt. And I've also said create a project plan.md file in this project with the full project plan broken down step by step so that we can track progress over multiple sessions. And that's going to allow Claude to basically have context of our project. If we work with it in multiple sessions, it might not build out the full project in one go here. We're going to have to work back and forth with it step by step to actually get all of these things working as it starts to put together our app. And this just means that we are able to give Claude Code the context of our full project by just referencing this file whenever we start a new session with Claude Code. And that is really important for basically to kind of help Claude Code have an understanding of our project without having to reread the entire code base every single time we start working with it, which makes it quicker. It saves us money. It just makes it easier for Claude Code to actually work on our code as well. So let's copy and paste this into Claude Code here. And we're going to put it into planning mode as well. So this is really, really important just before you get started. So just do Shift and Tab, and that is going to basically put it into plan mode here. We've got this v.config.ts file here, which we don't have to worry about because that was from a previous version of this project. I've actually decided to go with Next.js instead of V for this project, so don't worry about that. We've got plan mode selected here, so let's send this off to Claude Code. This looks a bit weird in this full view, and actually let's set up Cursor a little bit better to make it more familiar if you're coming from a vibe coding tool, and this is the way that I like to work with it as well. So what you can do here is just do split editor view in the top right and just split that. So we've got Claude Code on the left hand side. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller on the left, so we've got our Claude Code chat on the left, and then what I'm going to do is go back into the agents sidebar here in Cursor and just do a new agent just so I can access this browser feature here. So I'm just going to go to this browser browser icon and click Browser tab. And that's going to add a browser tab in our cursor window here. Let's close those tabs. And now we're basically going to be able to have our app preview on the right-hand side and Claude Code working on the left-hand side here for us. So whilst that goes and plans our project out, and it's going to come back and ask us a few questions. You can see there it's asking, can it do web search basically? We're going to just say yes, and that will let Claude Code do any of these actions. Whilst Claude Code is setting up our project and creating the plan, we're going to do a couple of things here. We're going to go to Convex and Clerk and actually set up our accounts for those whilst Claude Code is busy building our app. One thing to note here as well, before you actually put your first prompt in and send it to Claude Code, is I have actually changed the model here by doing /model and then selecting Opus as the model that I'm using for this. So I'm using Opus generally for these first prompts and for more complex features to just give Claude Code a better chance of building it successfully and just being able to constantly kind of work on the code without losing context, and just using that higher powered model generally gives a better result from the first prompt. So I found it to be a really good way of getting started, although it can be a little bit more expensive, especially if you're only on the pro plan. But I would definitely recommend starting off with something like Opus 4.5 to start planning and building your project from your first prompt. So as Claude Code goes through planning here, if you've added the line about creating a projectplan.md file into your project, as we've done in our first prompt here, it's going to create this projectplan.md file here, which you can see on the right is basically the full plan to build this application in a lot of detail and all of the steps through all of the different phases of kind of building this app and all of the kind of database schema, everything that we kind of need here. This is kind of like a little bit like a PRD, but more just like a task list for Claude Code to work through. Claude Code is also going to give us its task list in Claude Code on the left-hand side here as well, but we do have that projectplan.md file in our project now. So you can see the only file that I've got in here is projectplan.md. If I open that, it's got all of that information in as we kind of were looking at before. I'm going to close that left-hand panel, and basically Claude Code here has now got a few questions that it's going to ask us, and it will do this based on your app kind of prompt, your first prompt as well. Any questions that it doesn't understand exactly what you want to do with, it's going to ask you some questions in the chat, so you can just answer those. And this is where working with Claude Code is a little bit more like working with a programmer or a developer. Basically, it's like having a person there that you can ask questions to, and that is going to ask you questions back about what you want to get out of your project and how you want it to be built. And if you approach it with this kind of mindset, rather than just thinking it's just a kind of application that you can send kind of requests to, it's more of like a person that you're collaborating with, then you're going to get much better results as you continue to prompt it. So I'm going to answer these questions here from Claude Code. It's basically asked about the AI chat, a couple of questions, the knowledge base that we're creating in this app, the feature descriptions, and onboarding state persistence. So I'm going to answer these questions, and it's going to finalize the plan for this and then start building our application. So now we finished planning. You can see we've got our full implementation plan from Claude Code here. We've got the tech stack, the design system, implementation phases. So phase 1, 2, 3, 4, all of these pages to kind of build each of these different pages and features within our app, the AI chat panel, and then the polish as phase 11. And because we created that projectplan.md file, if we stop halfway through building this and then pick it up again with Claude Code, it's going to know how far we got through that project plan, and it's going to be able to continue building it, so it doesn't have to do it all in one go. And we kind of work with it iteratively as we're building this app. We've got the schema, all of the setup for this app, and the components and files. Database schema is here, the environment variables that we need to add in, dependencies, and then if we're happy with this plan in Claude Code, we can just say yes and auto accept. You can do yes and manually improve edits if you really want control over everything that Claude Code is doing, but I would recommend just doing yes and auto accept. It's still going to ask you questions about running stuff in the terminal and running certain commands. So yes and auto accept, and then we're going to start building our app project. So let's get this app built and see the first version that this creates from our first prompt. And you can see Claude has just created a to-do list here basically, and is just starting to ask us all of these actions that it's going to do, and it's going to work through this to-do list as it starts to build our app. So whilst Claude Code is building the first version of our app, what we're going to do is we're going to go and create our accounts and our projects in Convex and Clerk. And so Convex is the tool that we're using for our backend and our database, and Clerk is the tool that we're using for authentication here. And you can get projects set up with these for free, so you don't have to pay anything to sign up, and you only have to start paying once you exceed a certain amount of usage or a certain number of users. So it's a really great place to start to get your application up and running. And so in Convex, what we're going to do is go to convex.dev. You can create an account on Convex. I'm just going to log into my account here and create a new project. You click create create project and give the project name. So we're going to call this Scribe, and then this will create a project in Convex where we basically have a development and a production environment. So we basically, once we're ready to go to our live version, we can create our production deployment in Convex. But to start off with, we're going to be working in a development version of Convex to kind of get everything set up and working, to add in our data, add in our environment variables, all of that sort of stuff. So this is all we need to do in Convex for now, and we're going to go through and connect our Convex account in Cursor using Claude Code or the terminal. We're going to create a project in Clerk as well. So if you go to clerk.com, sign up for account, and then all we're going to do here is click create application. It will ask you to do this when you first create an account for Clerk anyway. I'm going to call this Scribe, and then it gives you kind of an idea of what this is going to look like on the right hand side as well. What authentication methods do we want to accept? Do we want to have email? Do we want to have Google? I am going to just have email sign up for now, just to make this easy, and then we can set up Google authentication later. So I think email and password is the easiest thing to kind of get things up and running here, and then you can set up Google authentication later, because you do have to go through the Google Cloud console to like figure that stuff out, and that can be a little bit tricky. We might do that later in this video, but let's see how much time we've got going through building this. And that has set up, again, in Clerk you have a development and a production instance of Clerk, so we can work in our development environment and basically create a bunch of stuff in our development environment. It doesn't matter what we create, test users, all of this stuff to kind of get things up and running. That's going to allow us to create our database backend and our authentication setup in the app that we're building with Claude Code in Cursor here. And so that's all you need to do to get those things set up. With that, we're ready to set these up in our app. And when Claude Code gets to the point where it's building those, we're going to then go in and test them and set it up whilst it's doing it. So Claude Code has now fully built our application. You can see here the build status. So it's gone through and fixed a bunch of type errors in the TypeScript as well as it was kind of going through building this app. And it's given us the next steps that you need to launch here. Now, it might not be in this exact format for you, but what it's going to do is it's going to break down what it's built and what you need to do next to actually get your local development server up and running, so that you can see this app kind of in the browser here that we've got as our preview window. What we need to do here is to get everything set up in this project so that we can create that local development environment. And a local development environment, or a local development server, is basically a server that we're going to run locally on our computer to actually serve our application, to be able to access our application without it being published to like a website or deployed to any sort of real environment. And we're going to do that using a couple of terminal commands here, and we're going to go through this step by step and set up all of the things that it's telling us to do here. So we need to get some environment variables, but let's just go through this step by step. So first we need to set up Convex, and this is going to allow us to connect this command here, npx convex dev, is going to allow us to connect to the Convex project we created in the previous step. And to do this, we're going to run this in the terminal. So these commands like this, npx convex dev, npm run dev, these are commands that you run in the terminal. So we're going to open a terminal window here. So you can do this by going to terminal and then clicking new terminal in Cursor, and that is going to open a terminal at the bottom here, and we're just going to paste in npx convex dev, and then that is going to ask us if we want to log in to our Convex account. So I've got an error here, and this is where AI can often go a little bit wrong sometimes. So I'm getting an error here with running this npx convex dev command. So I actually just asked here, like, what does this mean when I try to run this npx convex dev command and I get this error? It basically says that Convex should be initialized first. So we're going to copy this command back over to Cursor and run this in our project instead. And that isn't working, which means AI is hallucinated again. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to ask Claude Code here. So I'm going to say running npx convex dev gives me this error message. We're going to copy this error message in. What is causing this? So we're going to get Claude Code to help us fix this error that we're getting here. I'm going to close that terminal. So we've just got this one terminal here. This error is caused by the placeholder value I added to your .env.local file. So basically, Claude Code, I think, tried to add a bunch of placeholder values to our project instead of the actual URLs and the environment variables that we should have to try and basically verify that the app would build without any errors. So it's just removed those there. So let's try running this again. And we're getting another error here, so let's pop it back into Claude Code. So it looks like basically the terminal here is in the wrong directory, and I'm doing this as a non-technical person, so I'm not a developer, so I'm figuring this stuff out as we go as well. So basically we just need to navigate to the right directory in our Convex project. So let's copy this command. We need to basically navigate to this project in a terminal. I'm just going to do a new terminal here so that it's clean. Let's navigate to this project, npx convex dev, and this is now letting us set up Convex properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure this by choosing an existing project. I'm already logged into Convex here. It will ask you if you want to log into Convex if you haven't logged in to Convex using the terminal before this step. So I'm going to choose an existing project, and then we're going to choose Scribe, and this is basically going to connect this application to our Scribe project in Convex that we have set up here. We're going to be connecting these two things together. So Claude Code will be able to make changes to Convex in the Convex code files in our code base, and then Convex will be updated on the dashboard side when we have a look at Convex on convex.dev here, which is what we want. So that's all ready to go. It says Convex functions ready. So we can now move on to the next step here, which is to get our clerk keys. So go to dashboard.clerk.com, create a new application, copy the next publishable key and the clerk secret key, and set up a webhook and copy the clerk webhook secret. And we're going to add these to .env.local. So it's missed out a little bit of the steps here. So I'm going to open .env.local, and what we need to do is we need to put all of these in here. So these have now been updated by Clerk, which is great. So now we're going to add in these details for the publishable key, the secret key, and the webhook secret from Clerk. And then we're also going to add in the Anthropic API key and the Firecrawl API key here. So if I go to Clerk here, you can just see on this Next.js tab for the setup guide, it's basically got set your Clerk API keys here, and I've just turned these to toggle to view them on. So we're going to copy these over from Clerk here into our project here. So our Clerk publishable key and our Clerk secret key. And then we're going to create a webhook in Clerk so that we can copy that over as well. So let's go to configure in Clerk, and I'm just going to search for webhooks in this search. You can click on webhooks here, and now we're going to be able to set up a Clerk webhook. Now when we create a webhook in Clerk, we need to add an endpoint URL to this. So I'm going to go back to cursor, and I'm just going to ask Claude Code, what endpoint URL should I use when setting up my Clerk webhook? So we need to use our Convex HTTP actions URL, not your Next.js app URL. So based on your Convex deployment, your webhook endpoint should be this. So here we go. We're just going to copy this over. However, looking at the current setup, the webhook is configured as a Next.js API. So if you're running the Next.js app, use this. For local development, you'll need to use a tunnel service like ngrok in the Clerk dashboard. So we might have to set this up slightly differently for local development here using this method. We might not even need the Clerk webhook secret to actually get this up and running. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the API keys here, the Anthropic and the Firecrawl API key, and then we're going to do npm run dev to see if we can get this up and running and to see what things work and what things don't work here before we actually do anything else. So I've just added my Anthropic and my Firecrawl API key here. I'm going to create a new terminal, and we're going to just do npm run dev to get this app up and running basically, and then see if any errors come back. And npm run dev is a pretty standard command for basically getting a local app up and running. It says it wants to open localhost 3000 right now, which is basically, I'm going to just do this in open in cursor browser. This is the way that we're going to view our local application, and we'll be able to see it kind of here in cursor. And a local host URL is basically a URL to access our local development server. So that's up and running correctly, and we can see here we've got welcome to Scribe, plan your apps, track features, build great products, which is nice because that's the channel. Sign in to Scribe, welcome back. This is basically our Clerk sign up here with our email address. We can click sign up, and we're going to go to the sign up page here using Clerk, and we can go through and test that this application works now. Now that we've got this set up, we've got it up and running. What we're going to do is we're going to go through and test everything to see if it works, test our database, test authentication, and see if we need to fix anything here to get this app working. So now Claude Code has built the first version of this application. Let's just go through and see what works and what doesn't. And we're trying to basically check here the authentication part of this and the database part of this as well. So what we're looking for is that when we sign up with Clerk, that a user gets created with Clerk and that we can access our app. And we also want to see that if we create anything in the app here related to our database, we also see stuff created in the database as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go back over to our Convex dashboard, and just to check here in the data section that we do actually have tables that have been created. So we have them here. So we've got apps, chat messages, features, knowledge docs, PRDs, releases, stacks, and users. And that is everything that we need in our app. And those tables have been created, which is great. So let's go back to Cursor. And now we want to check that when we sign up, we're actually creating an account in Clerk. So let's sign up here. One thing that I would want to do in Clerk actually before we try signing up is just configure this so that when you sign up, we don't require an email verification code. So we're not going to turn off. So disable email verification at sign up. It says it might result in low quality emails, but for the development version of this, we're going to be the only person, or AI is going to be the only thing that tests this. So that is absolutely fine. So let's save that. We can come back here later and turn it on when we move to a production instance in Clerk. So let's continue through here, add a password. Let's continue signing up to our app. And whilst that is loading, I'm going to go back over to Clerk. I'm just going to go to overview, and we can see here that this account has signed up. So the sign up is working correctly. And let's go over to Convex and look at users. So the users table is empty currently. So we might want to make sure that users are being added. This is still rendering. I'm actually going to open the console here, and to do that you just go to this icon in the right hand side, top right hand side of the browser window in Cursor, and this gives you your development console here, and we can basically see the issues that are happening here. So it says access to fetch the Clerk from origin has been blocked by cause. No access header is present in the requested resource. So we're going to copy this over. So basically there's an issue here with Clerk in letting us sign into this app. So let's try and fix this issue with Claude Code. So what we're going to do with Claude Code is either you can create a new conversation, or you can do /clear to clear the context of your existing conversation. And the reason that we're going to do this is because we've got to the end of this first task here of building the app, and every time we want to build a new feature or do something different in our app, we want to start a new conversation or clear the context so that Claude Code is starting from scratch, and we're also not using up loads of our tokens by just sending off a load of tokens for every single request that we're making. That will save our usage and make it a lot easier to save a little bit of money and tokens when we're kind of using Claude Code. So because I want to keep this information up here in this chat, I'm actually just going to do a new window here, a new chat, and we're going to change this to edit automatically, and then I'm just going to ask Claude Code and paste in this error so that we can try and fix it. Okay, so here Claude Code has basically said that this is a known issue with Clerk, and it's to do with the Clerk telemetry endpoint and not the authentication flow. So what it's done is basically disabled this in our settings, and it says this will basically not affect the way that Clerk functions. It just might affect some of the analytics that we get back from Clerk. So that's absolutely fine for whilst we're building our application here. So I'm happy with that. And you can see on the right here that reloading this after signing in has taken me to this screen here, which is the welcome screen. So welcome to Scribe. Start planning your next great app. So let's create a new app. Name your app. So let's call it Scribe. We're going to do something meta here. We're going to plan Scribe with Scribe, which is something that I love to see startups do, is to use their own tool to actually build the product. So it's going to be called Scribe. Let's go to the next step here. It is going to be a web app. That's what we're building. And the styling is pretty good already, to be fair. Add the builder. We're going to choose Claude Code. That's what we're building it with. Add a front end, Next.js, and we're also using React, TypeScript, and Tailwind. For the back end, we're using Convex, database Convex, authentication, we are using Clerk, and then APIs, we're going to use Claude, and then we click Create App. Now, what I would like, it says you can skip this. There's actually no way of clicking skip here. So what I'm going to do is in this project, because I can't use Scribe to do this, which I actually would do, I'm going to create a new folder in my project and call it planning. And what I'm going to do in this planning folder is basically add some documents here. So I'm going to create a file, and it's going to be called features.md. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a list of built. We're going to break this up by built features and to do. And so I'm just going to create a list of features that I want to build here. So this one is going to be add in skip button to the tech stack onboarding screen. And this is something that I would recommend doing. It's just like keeping a track of what you want to build, what you're working on currently and what you've completed as you're kind of working through this. And we're also going to be creating documents in here to outline different features as we kind of build them as well. And that's going to be the problem that Scribe is trying to solve here as well. Let's click create app. We've got some issues in Next.js, and these are the familiar issues that you probably have seen if you've vibe coded anything before. So Convex, server error, uncaught error, not authenticated here. So I'm going to put this back into Claude Code. What we're going to do is we're going to do /clear to clear the conversation. And we're going to say, when I click create app at the end of the onboarding flow, I get this error and the app does not proceed. Can you investigate and fix anything that might be causing this? So that's one way that I like to prompt for fixing bugs with AI coding tools, is just to say where the thing happened, give it the error message, and then say investigate and fix instead of just saying to fix, because then it will go and have a look in your code base a little bit deeper to try and understand what is going on here. So it's investigating the authentication error. It must be authentication in some capacity. That's what it's identified as. It is related to Convex as well. So if I go back to Convex here and look at apps, you can see that no apps have been created. So there's some sort of issue with our connection to Convex from our application here. And the issue that it's found here is that it doesn't have this auth.config.js file in the code, and it requires that to actually process the authentication from Clerk. So we're going to add that. So I'm just going to say yes, and then don't ask again. And that will hopefully fix this issue with our app. So we need to go through and do some things here. So basically just follow the instructions that Claude Code is giving me, and you can do the same. Just follow the instructions that Claude Code gives you. Basically, we need to add an environment variable to Convex, and it's called clerk_JWT issuer domain. So I'm going to go over to Convex, and we can go to settings and then environment variables here in Convex to basically add any environment variables. So we're going to add this in, and then we're going to go back and we're going to add, so you can find this URL in your Clerk dashboard under configure JWT templates or in your Clerk domain settings. It typically looks like clerk.yourapp.com. So we're going to go to Clerk, have a look for this. And because I don't know exactly where to find this information, I'm using Dia here, but you can use Comet or you can use Atlas from OpenAI or any kind of AI browser here to just query the tab that I'm working in. I'm looking at Clerk here. I've just asked, how do I find my Clerk front-end API URL? So go to Clerk dashboard, API keys, copy the front-end API URL. So let's go to API keys, and we've got here our front-end API URL. So this is what we're going to copy here, our front-end API URL. So we've found that. So let's go back to Convex, not cursor, and go to our environment variables, and we need to set that in our environment variables. So now we've done that. Create a JWT template in Clerk. If not already done, go to your Clerk dashboard, navigate to configure JWT templates, create a new template named Convex, and leave the default settings. So let's go to Clerk. We'll go to configure, and we're going to search for JWT templates. So there's JWT templates. No templates are added here, so we're going to add a new template. We're going to call this Convex, and we're going to leave everything else the same, and then we just save this. There we go. So now we've added our JWT template. We've got a Convex JWT template here, which is leave the default settings. Convex will automatically validate the token. After completing these steps, redeploy your Convex functions. Okay, so we're going to rerun npx convex dev in the terminal. So let's go back to the terminal where Convex is running, which is here. And we're going to do Control and C to stop that process. And then we're just going to do npx convex dev to get that rerunning again in our project. So we're getting this new error here when I refreshed the app. So we're just going to copy and paste this into the same chat with Claude Code because it's related to the same issue. So in that case, it's okay to use the same chat to try and fix these. So let's just say we're getting this error related to this Convex and Clerk setup. Help me fix this error. So Claude Code is going to help us fix this. Basically, I think there's just some issue with the way that JWT and the front end URL is set between Convex and Clerk. So what it says here is that the config looks correct. The error message indicates the issue is that the JWT audience claim doesn't match Convex. You need to configure a JWT template in Clerk with the correct audience. So this is what we've done. New template, select Convex. Clerk has a built-in Convex template. Okay, so maybe we just didn't use quite the right template in Clerk. So let's go back to Clerk. I'm going to delete this template. Let's delete the template here, add a new template, and we're going to click, okay, so that's what I missed. It's just called Convex, and that's already set up. So let's save that. And it's already got all of the information that it needs in there. That makes a lot more sense. Now we've got this Convex template in here. We need to restart Convex again. So let's do Control C to stop that from running. npx convex dev to rerun our backend in Convex. Now that's ready to go. Let's refresh our app and see if we can go through and create our account here correctly, or create our app correctly. Let's add a backend, add a database, add authentication, which is Clerk, add APIs, which is Claude, and then create our app. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we have an error related to the TipTap document editor, basically. So this is just this one line here. So TipTap error SSR has been detected. Please set immediately render. Okay, so let's go back to Claude Code, do /clear to clear this conversation. I'm going to say we're getting an error related to TipTap and fix this error. And we've got the file name here as well. So we've got markdown-editor.tsx. So we're going to reference that in the chat. And any way you can point the AI to the specific file that it's happening in, it's going to use less tokens as well. And it's going to cost you less money. So we'll say this is happening on line 23 in markdown-editor.tsx. So let's send that to Claude Code. So there we go. We've updated that, and now we're in our account in the app here on the right hand side. I can see that Clerk, we've got this menu here. This is not the actual Clerk like profile management. We've got Scribe as our app and then create new app. So we can go create new app. That would take us back into this flow. There isn't a way of closing that, so we need to add a close option to the onboarding flow. This is saying saved. You can download the MD file for this, but there's not actually anything in this document. This is the product requirements document for your app. There would be an AI chat on the left hand side here, which we can chat to. One thing that I like to do here is I'm going to add in some information to the documentation so that we can check that the AI context is actually working. We've got our stack, which if I go to the stack page has our tech stack for this app project. We've got knowledge, which has a knowledge base where we can quickly create these, add content to your PRD to enable AI generation for these. So add knowledge will let me add from a URL or from scratch. If I do from scratch, this creates a new document, which I then go to the document editor. You can also open up the chat here to chat with this document. Back to knowledge, and then if I go to features, we get a release view and a progress view, which has our backlog, progress, testing, complete, and live. And we can add features to each of these. We can also go to the release view, add a release. And so I'm going to say MVP is my release. Then we're going to add a feature to the MVP. It says add a PRD first to get feature ideas. So that would generate feature ideas from our PRD. And this has all come from this first prompt, by the way, which is why I think the first prompt is really good to add as much detail as possible. If I create a feature from scratch here, I can add the feature name, give it a status, backlog, in testing, progress, and we can add it to a release as well as adding a description here and then create the feature. This is looking pretty good, like straight away. I'm going to go over to Convex though, because the point of what we're trying to do here is to test the database is working and the authentication is working. So if I go into my data, I can now see that an app has been created, no features have been created, knowledge stock has been created, PRD has been created for that app, a release has been created, which I just added, a tech stack has been created. These should all be connected to the same ID. So if I go to releases here, it's got the same ID here basically, 72, 75. It doesn't, so it doesn't have the same ID. So the user, there's a Clerk ID for these. I just want to make sure that these are being like connected to the user. Let's go back to our app and let's try and log in as a different user. So I'm going to go sign out here, and we've got one issue come up here. So let's fix that. Cannot update a component router while rendering a different component app layout to locate. This is related to a specific file. So again, let's copy this error over. I'm going to clear the chat history in Claude Code as usual, and we're going to say when logging out of my account I get this error. This is happening in line 31 of the layout.tsx file. Can you investigate and fix this issue. And Claude Code says it's found the issue. On line 31, it's being called directly during render, which causes the React error. The fix is to wrap the redirect in a use effect hook so that it happens after the render cycle completes, not during rendering. And this is the difference that is added here. So we're going to just say yes and don't ask again. So you don't necessarily need to know like all the code that's going on here. If you're non-technical like me, maybe you don't care about looking at the difference in the code. Sometimes it can be useful just to see like what the AI is editing, just so that you have the confidence that it's not touching anything that it shouldn't be touching. So that's fixed that issue. So let's sign up. Let's sign up with a different email address here. chris1@test.com. We're going to go into my test emails now. Let's sign up. So we go through the new Scribe 2. We're going to create a desktop app for this. We're going to build it with Claude Code. We need to add some different frameworks here for sure. I'm just going to select the same ones for now. Convex, let's do Superbase. We're not doing Superbase in the authentication with Convex. That doesn't make any sense. I'm going to use OpenAI for this one instead. Let's create an app. We've created the app here. Okay, so let's try logging out to make sure that sign out happens without any errors. Great. And let's try logging back into an account here just to see that works with email and password. Okay, so that is all working correct. And we've got a feature here. We logged into this one. Let's sign out and let's log back into chris1@test.com. I did a slightly different password there. So based on that setup, we now have Clerk working correctly. We have Convex working correctly. Things are being created in our database. We have all the right tables in our database. Users are being created in our Clerk dashboard here when we're signing up. So everything is set up correctly here in our app as far as I can tell. Now, what we're going to do is go on to adding payments before we start doing any more features here and testing the app a bit more thoroughly. So before we set our payments here, actually in the project, we're going to do one more thing, which is to set up Git and GitHub for our application here. And if you don't know what Git or GitHub is, it basically is version control for your code base. And GitHub is a kind of secure cloud storage for your GitHub repository. So it's a way of storing all of our code in the cloud somewhere that's not on our local machine, and it's the source of truth for all of the code in our project. And we're going to use GitHub as the source of truth rather than the code that exists on our local machine that we've got here in this project on the left. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to install and set up a couple of things first, and then we're going to do a couple of things in the terminal just to get this up and running. All we have to do then is just commit to our repository in GitHub or submit a pull request anytime we make a significant change to the code in this project here. And that is going to give us version control in GitHub so that we can kind of go back to a previous version of our project at any point as well. And so all we have to do first is to go to GitHub, create an account on GitHub. If you don't already have one, go to github.com and then you'll come through to a screen like this. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new repository. So click on new to create a repository, give the repository a name. So this is going to be Scribe. I'm going to say a repository for the Scribe app. We're going to add that in here. We're going to choose the visibility. I'm going to say this is private and we're going to create our repository here. Then this is going to create an empty repository in our GitHub account. What we want to do is copy this here, this URL here, the https scribe.git, whatever your kind of repository URL is here, copy that to your clipboard. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to install the GitHub CLI. This just means that we can interact with GitHub in our terminal, in Cursor, or whatever coding tool you're using. And so all you have to do is download that for Mac or use this install command in the terminal. You can copy and paste that into a terminal, either in Cursor or just open a blank terminal and install the GitHub CLI that way. Once you've done that, go back to Cursor here. What we're going to do is we're going to add a new terminal here and we're going to paste this and we're going to basically say do this command, and we're going to do this command first. So the first thing you want to do is to do git status. Now this will tell you if Claude Code has created a Git repository for this project already, because a lot of the time it does do that just automatically without you asking. So I'll do git status here, and what I can see is that there is a Git repository that has been created. We're on the branch main and there's a bunch of changes that we haven't actually committed to this repository. So that's great. We do have a Git repository that's been created for this project already. So if you don't have one, if you don't have a repository here, you can do git init to create one. And if you do have one like we've got here, we can do git remote, add origin, and then paste the GitHub URL that we copied here, and that is going to add a remote Git repository to this project. Once you've added that, you can check that that has added correctly by doing git remote -v, and that will basically tell us the remote origin that we've just added here to make sure that we've got that correct. And now that we've set up our GitHub remote repository, what we're going to do here is we're going to do a couple more commands just to make our first pull request, and this is going to make it a lot easier to make changes going forwards. So all we have to do first is to do this command first. We're going to do git add -a. What this does is this basically gets all of the changes, all of the files in our project ready to commit. Then we're going to do a git commit -m, and this commits all of the changes to our local repository, all of the latest changes in our code base here. So we'll do that. And one thing to note here is that -m actually needs a message. So we're going to do git commit -m, and m is basically just to add a message here of what we did. So we're just going to call this database and authentication, and that is going to be our message for this commit. It's a good practice to get into adding messages with your commits so that you know which versions you did which features. If you want to restore a previous version, you can always go back and look at the name of the commit before you actually do that. So we're going to add that, and this is going to commit all of these changes to our Git repository. And then what we're going to do is we're basically going to push all of the code in our project to our remote repository, and we're going to do it with this command here, git push -u origin head. And all that means, to break it down, is head is our local branch of code. These are weird words, but we only have to do this once per project. Head is our local code that we've got here. Origin is the remote repository that we've already defined. -u is basically saying that our remote repository is upstream from our local repository, so that's why we're pushing upstream to the remote repository from our local code base. That is all that this command means, and this is going to basically create a new branch main, and that is going to do that in our GitHub repository. So if you go back to GitHub now and refresh this repository on GitHub, you can see that all of our code from our local repository has now been pushed to this GitHub repository. Whenever we're working on it locally, is all we have to do now is we just do git push if we want to actually push that to our repository again, or we can create a pull request, which you can do with the GitHub CLI. We're not going to do that now, but that is how to set up GitHub for your project in whatever coding tool you're using. And now we can also get Claude Code to do this for us as well. So we can remove this terminal link now, and let's get back to actually building our app, and we're going to add payments in next. Now let's get started adding payments to our app, and I want to add payments to this app in a way where we're basically kind of limiting certain features to paid users, and we're going to keep it pretty simple to start off with. So in the app at the moment, if you log in, so if I log in here to my account in our app that we've got up and running here. So once you've logged into the app here, you can see that there are some AI features in this app. Like you've got this AI assistant on the left hand side here that you can use to kind of create stuff in your knowledge base. Also, if you click add knowledge from the knowledge base here, I do want to add an option to actually be able to generate knowledge on a specific topic and do like research with an AI model to create like a knowledge file that you could download as an MD file. And also on the features section here, if you click add feature, you've got this generate kind of features idea option. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically like create our payment plan here so that if you want to access these AI features, you have to sign up to a monthly subscription plan in order to access the AI features. And that gives you a certain amount of like messages or generations on your kind of project. What I'm going to do first is that we're going to set it up in a fairly basic way with Polar. And we're going to use Polar for our payments instead of Stripe, because Polar basically acts as a merchant of record, which basically means that they cover all the international tax. You don't have to deal with any international tax, which can be a massive pain if you're using Stripe and you're accepting payments from anywhere in the world. You have to figure out all that tax stuff afterwards, what tax you charge in what countries. Polar basically covers all of that for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And we're going to set up Polar by setting up an account first on the Polar sandbox. So what we're going to do here is we're basically going to set up an account in Polar in the sandbox, going to create a product, create a checkout link, and then we're going to ask Claude Code to help us implement this using Polar, and it will guide us through the steps to kind of add this to our application. And we're going to start off off by just gating this AI assistant feature in the app to this paid plan. So what you're going to do first here is go over to sandbox.polar.sh. You're going to want to click get started and create an account. I'm going to log into my account here. This is just a dashboard that I had for another product. It's going to ask you to create a new organization. So we're going to create a new organization here. I'm just going to call this Scribe, and this organization slug is going to be Scribe. I understand the restrictions above. Let's create our organization. Let's set up our first project. It asks you then to set up your first product. We're actually going to do this manually. So I'm just going to go configure manually. We're going to call this Scribe monthly, and we're going to add the description Scribe monthly subscription. We're not going to add any media here. We're going to do this as a recurring subscription every 1 month, and we're going to set the price to $29 a month. And then we're going to not change anything else. Just click create product. This is going to create a product in our account, and then it's going to help us integrate the checkout with our Next.js app. So this is integrate checkouts with your favorite framework. And basically what we have to do here on the right hand side, so install dependencies, add environment variables. We can actually get Claude Code to help us do that. So we don't really have to do this all ourselves. So what I'm going to do is just click view documentation, and this will take us to the documentation that we're going to provide to Claude Code as the URL. And if we go back to this, let's just click go to dashboard. This will take us to our dashboard for Scribe. We've got our product Scribe monthly already set up here. You're then going to want to create a checkout link. So the easiest way to do this is basically to redirect someone to a Polar checkout from our application when they want to pay, and then redirect them back to the app after they've paid and they've got an active subscription. And then when they get back to the app, we want to do a check basically to see have they got an active subscription and what features we should give them access to. So let's create a checkout link here first. I'm going to call this Scribe test. We're going to select the products that we want in this checkout, which is Scribe monthly. If you want to add a discount to test this, we're going to allow discount codes, require billing address. We don't really need to do this at this point. We can enable a free trial period. We can also do that on the product as well. We're not going to add a free trial here because we just want people to pay straight away if they want to access those features. So let's create this checkout link for Scribe, and that is going to basically, if we click on this checkout here, we can see this gives us a link to this checkout that we're going to use in our application. Now we're going to have to set up a couple of other things in Polar as well here to get started. You're going to need to go to settings in Polar, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then create a developer token here. So let's click new token. We're going to call this Scribe, and we're going to set the expiration to no expiration, and we're just going to select all on the scopes and then create this token. This is going to give us a token that we can basically allow our app to actually access Polar. Then we're going to want to go back to this documentation. Let's copy the URL for this documentation, go over to cursor, and basically clear this chat in Claude Code. So we're going to clear this conversation, and then we're going to prompt Claude Code to add in Polar for payments to our application. One other piece of documentation that we do actually want to give Claude Code here as well is basically the embedded checkout documentation for Polar. So you have this framework, basically framework adapters for payments and checkout with Next.js. I'm then going to go into the checkout section here. We're going to click on embedded checkout, and this is the option that we're going to do in our app. So basically this kind of opens a pop-up that we can do an embedded checkout in, and then that will keep users on our application so that they don't go to a different page. Let's see how Claude Code sets this up so that we can actually make sure this works. I'm going to paste this URL in here as well. So this is the prompt that we're going to have here. We're going to say, let's add payments to this app using Polar. And here is the documentation. We've linked to the documentation. I want to allow users to create a free account to use the app, but then block access to the AI assistant feature unless the user has an active subscription. We then say, use the embedded checkout method for taking payments using Polar. And I've then said, create a message on the AI chat feature that blurs the chat and has an upgrade message if the user does not have an active subscription. Also add a full width banner above the top navigation if a user is not subscribed, asking the user to upgrade their account as well. And we should also check subscription status using a Polar webhook. And then I've also asked Opus to ask me for the checkout link, webhook, and access token when it needs them. And I'm going to use Shift and Tab just to change this to plan mode first. And we're going to send this to Opus and basically get it to plan these changes. Now, the good thing here is that we've pushed all of our code to GitHub. So any changes that we do here in our code locally is not not going to actually affect any of the code that we have on GitHub. That's why it's so crucial to keep the kind of main code, the working code that you have in GitHub, because if you break anything locally, you can always just reclone that and start from scratch again. And we can also do more advanced things later, like learn how to create new branches in GitHub, work in different branches, and a bunch of other stuff as well. For now, we're just going to keep it really, really simple so that we're just working on this locally whilst we make these kind of more complex changes to our project and not actually making any changes to the code that we have in GitHub. So let's see what Claude Code comes back with here as it sets up our payment functionality using Polar in this app. So now Claude Code is starting to ask us some questions about the different parts of the UI that we're going to add here. So where should the upgrade pricing UI appear? And we're going to add it to the modal only. And the banner scope here, should the upgrade banner appear only on the app pages or also on other pages like the welcome and dashboard page? So let's say only on the app pages. So inside the app, the same like pages that we've got here. We don't want it to appear on the welcome kind of an onboarding sequence. So let's just do it on the app. And now Claude Code has all the information it needs to go and create a plan for us. So here's the plan that Claude Code has come back with here. So it's a pretty big plan here. So add Polar subscription payments to gate the AI assistant feature. Free users can use the app, but see a blurred chat panel with an upgrade prompt. Checkout UI, we're going to do modal overlay only, no dedicated page pricing. Banner scope is the app pages only. Files to create, so it's going to add subscriptions.ts as a table to Convex and then do that migration. It's then going to add the webhook handler here as well so that we can check subscription status. It's going to also do a bunch of other things here as well. So modifying the database schema and installing the Polar dependencies in the project and adding the environment variables to our .env.local file. And then it's going to basically kind of go through this in this order: key implementation details, webhook user matching, subscription status flow, and banner dismissal. So I'm going to say yes and auto accept all of these and then let Claude Code create a little to-do list and go through and make these changes in our project. So Claude Code has gone through and added the Polar payments integration to our app. It's done all of this stuff. The implementation is complete and it's giving us steps to complete the setup as well. So we need to provide the Polar access token, the Polar webhook secret, and the Polar checkout link, and that is in the .env.local file. So what we're going to do is it says go to Polar dashboard settings webhooks, add the webhook URL, and it gives us the webhook URL here that we're needing to add. So we need to add that for our local host URL. Select these events and copy the webhook secret to your .env.local file. So we've got the access token and the Polar checkout link. So if we go to .env.local here, what we're going to do is we're going to add the access token from Polar here. And all we need to do when we go into the actual production version of Polar rather than the sandbox version of Polar is to just change these details in the .env.local file and create a new webhook in our production instance of Polar before we actually go live with this. That's all that we need to do. And so let's just add the details from our sandbox version first. So let's go down and let's copy the access token at the bottom in settings here. And let's go back to cursor and put this access token in here. We're also going to go to the checkout link that we created here. We're going to copy this checkout link here and go back to cursor and paste that into here. And we're going to save that. And then we're going to create the Polar webhook as Claude Code has instructed us to. So Polar dashboard settings webhooks, add this webhook URL. So let's go to Polar, go settings, webhooks, add an endpoint, and then we're going to paste this URL in here. We're going to replace this yourdomain.com to localhost 3000. And let's just double check that that's correct here. Localhost, HTTP localhost 3000. So let's go back to Polar. We might need to change this to HTTP, and then we're going to select the events that it's told us. So subscription created, subscription updated, cancelled, and active. So let's go back to Polar and do created, updated, active, cancelled. And these are the ones that we need to create here. Let's create this. We need to select the raw payload format for this and then click create. It needs to be HTTPS. So let's create this. So we've now created this webhook URL here, and we're going to copy this over and paste this. So we've got our webhook secret here underneath. So we're going to copy this secret and we're going to go back to cursor and we're going to go to the .env.local file and we're going to paste that in here, and then we're going to save this file. And now when we have these values, just add them to .env.local and the integration will be ready to use. So now we're going to test it in our app here on localhost, and I'm fully expecting that some things are going to absolutely break when we try and do this. So if I open the AI Assistant. It says unlock AI Assistant, upgrade to Pro. Let's click upgrade to Pro, see what happens. Okay, so the Polar embedded checkout here is actually working. We can put our details in here. This is to upgrade to this plan. This is $29 a month with $5.80 in taxes. This is just the sandbox for Polar, so we can use these card details here. Just copy them over. Go back to cursor, paste these in here. I'm going to put 130, 123, cardholder name, Chris, discount code. We don't have one. I'm just going to do email. Let's put in the email here. This is the same email as I'm using for the account that we've logged into here as well. And then let's subscribe, and then let's see if this gives us access to these features in our app. It hasn't done. So we're basically getting stuck on this. So if I go through here, I'm then getting asked to so if I just double check on Clerk here, we're logged in as Chris at telescope.design. I've already upgraded to Pro on this account. So let's go back to Polar because the checkout link is working correctly. It's just not checking the subscription status correctly. So that means that there's something not working quite right with the webhook here. So you can see here we're getting a failed response from the webhook request that we've got here. And this might be to do with the HTTPS and how we set this up. And if I go into the developer console here, we can see that violation, potential permissions policy violation, payment is not allowed in this document. We've got some issues that we need to resolve here related to Polar checking the subscription status. So let's go back to Claude Code here and try and figure this out. So I'm just going to ask Claude Code here to see if it can help us figure out this problem. And this is how we can fix these bugs as we're getting them in our app. What we want to use is this format for basically fixing any bug that we're getting when we're using any of these vibe coding tools. And that is to say, what caused the bug? What did we do? Or what is happening that is causing this error? So I'm saying the webhook for Polar is failing after a user subscribes and is then returned to the app. This means we are unable to check the subscription status. We're then going to give the error message that is happening. So I've said in the console we're getting this error, potential permissions policy violation, and then I've also given some additional context as to what I've done. We set the webhook URL to HTTPS localhost when our actual local environment is just HTTP localhost. Polar, the webhook couldn't accept HTTP for some reason, so we're just going to ask Claude Code what is going on here to see if it can help us figure out this issue so that we can get Polar actually set up on our local environment to test it. Basically, what it's saying here is that we need to use a tunneling service to expose our local server to the internet so that Polar can actually see it and then check using a webhook. And so we're going to use ngrok for this, which is recommended. And a tunneling service is basically how we're going to get our local host environment to be exposed to the internet so that we can use different APIs like the Polar webhook here to actually get this working in our local environment. So let's select this option in Claude Code and it will help us set up ngrok. So here is our step-by-step for installing ngrok, basically to go through these steps. So on Mac OS with Homebrew, so if you don't have Homebrew installed, you can just Google Homebrew and install Homebrew on your Mac. So we're going to use this command in the terminal. So let's open up a new terminal here and we're going to install ngrok. Now we've installed ngrok, we're going to go to ngrok.com and sign up for a free account. And after signing in, we're going to get your auth token in the dashboard. So let's go and do that. So this is ngrok.com. You just click sign up to create a free account here. Now you've signed up for an account on ngrok, you're going to basically get this command to add your authorization token to the default ngrok.yml configuration file. So this is going to add our ngrok authentication token to our ngrok config, and we're going to basically just copy and paste that command back into the terminal here, and this is going to save the auth token to our configuration file, which is basically this step that it's told us to do here. Then we're going to start the tunnel. So with your Next.js dev server running on port 3000, do ngrok http 3000. So let's copy that over and let's paste that into the terminal as well. And then we're going to get this forwarding URL here, which is https darlingly unannounced renita.ngrok-free.dev. This is the forwarding for our localhost environment. So this is the URL that we can use for our Polar webhook. So if we go back to Polar here and go to the sandbox environment, we go to webhooks. So let's delete this webhook here. Let's delete this webhook with all these failed results. Let's add a new webhook here with this ngrok URL that we've got here. Select raw. Let's select subscription, created, updated, active, and cancelled. Click create here. Oh, we need to add in the /API/webhooks/Polar into this here. Doing a copy copy that and then paste it onto the end of this URL. Let's create this. So I'm just going to check with Claude Code here, because what I've got here is a free.dev URL, whereas Claude Code is saying that I should have a free.app URL with ngrok. So let's just ask that question. So I just said ngrok has given me a .dev forwarding URL, not .app. Does it need to be .app? So here's no, it doesn't need to be .app. The free.app was just an example. Any ngrok URL will work, including .dev domains, whatever forwarding URL ngrok gave you. So we're going to do that. So that is basically the thing that we're going to add here. .ngrok-free /API/webhooks/polar. Let's go back to this, and for some reason we can't add this URL as a webhook to Polar. So let's just ask Claude Code about this. So we're just going to ask Claude Code why we can't do this in Polar. So Polar likely requires the webhook URL to be validated or may have restrictions on certain domains. So test if ngrok URL is reachable. Update this. So we basically just use whatever forwarding URL ngrok gave you. So for example, if ngrok shows this, so we should have this available. It's online. So let's check that this is working. So Claude Code has actually given us an alternate method to do here. So it seems that the free tier of ngrok basically isn't going to allow us to do this. So let's do this instead. npx local tunnel. So we're going to run this through a local tunnel, and this is going to give us a URL that we can use in Polar as the webhook. So let's open up a new terminal and just paste this command in. npx local tunnel port 3000. So install the following packages. Yes, we're going to install local tunnel here. So this is our URL. So we can copy this in, go over to the Polar sandbox dashboard, and let's use this URL here to test this URL instead. Let's create this. That is going to create the endpoint for us here. So we've now got this, and so now we've set up this webhook. Let's copy this secret over instead, go back to cursor. I'm just going to update the .env.local with the different webhook secret here, and let's save that. So now we've saved that. Let's restart our application. Just check to see if any webhook event has been triggered here. No. So let's go back to cursor. Let's try upgrading again through Polar here. What I'm going to check as well is that the subscription has also been created in Convex, because we want to store this in Convex as a subscription that someone has paid for in the database as well. So let's process this payment. Let's go through here. Okay, you already have an active subscription. Polar is working. It's checking the subscription status properly. If I open the console here, let's see. So this is not actually checking the subscription status. So what we're going to do is we're going to sign out, and we're going to try and trigger this again. So let's log in here, and this should trigger the webhook to check the subscription status. So it's not actually doing that here. So let's ask Claude Code to make sure that we're checking the subscription status. So I'm going to say currently the app is only checking the subscription status after the user completes the subscription checkout. We should check subscription status every time a user logs into their account to allow them to access the AI assistant feature if they are subscribed. Check subscription status using the Polar webhook. And then we're going to send this to Claude Code. What I want to do here is, because it looks like in the console that the subscription status is not being checked. Otherwise we would see something here that would basically show that it was checking the subscription status in this app. So we're checking the subscription status when the user completes a checkout, but we're not checking it when a user logs in basically. So it says currently we only update subscription status when Polar sends a webhook. We should also check subscription status when a user logs in. However, webhooks are push based. Polar sends them to us, so we can't use webhooks to check on login. Instead, we should use the Polar API to check subscription status when a user logs in. Okay, so now we're going to use the Polar API here. So basically the webhook is only going to check it when a user subscribes. So we're going to look up, basically Claude Code here is going to look up the Polar API documentation to set this up, and then it's going to create the API helper to check subscription status and add the subscription check to Clerk webhook on user login, and then test the subscription status sync on login here. So this should help us test that a customer, basically check that a customer is subscribed whenever they log into the app. So here is a summary of what Claude Code has set up here. So basically it's added a helper to check subscription status via the Polar API by basically looking up subscriptions by customer email. It's also updated this. So now checks Polar subscription status when users are created or updated. And it's also added a new query to look up users by their Clerk ID and installed the Polar SDK. Basically, we have to go through these steps to enable session.created in Clerk webhook. So this connects to Clerk, which we're using for login and sign up, which makes sense. Every time a user creates an account or logs in, we're going to basically use a webhook from Clerk to kind of check the subscription status us against Polar there. So we're going to go to the Clerk dashboard, navigate to webhooks. So let's go to clerk.com. We're going to go to our dashboard here. We're going to go to configure, and then we're going to go to webhooks, and we're just going to search webhooks here. So close to webhooks here, and then we're going to add an endpoint. We click on your existing webhook, the one pointing to your ngrok URL or production URL, which we don't actually have in Clerk. So we do not have an endpoint yet. Let's just ask Claude Code here. We don't have a webhook in Clerk set up yet. Help me set this up for this project. So we're going to get Code to actually just help us set up this webhook with the right details here. So go to the Clerk dashboard and click add endpoint, set the endpoint URL to your ngrok URL plus the webhook path, which we're not actually going to do. We're going to do it to this local tunnel URL. That's the one that we're doing. We're not using ngrok for Polar. We're using the local tunnel here. So let's go back to here, add the endpoint, add this, and then it's /API/webhooks/clerk. So let's go to this, and then we want to subscribe to the events user created, updated, deleted, and session created. So we're going to search for those. User created, user deleted, user updated, and then session. We're going to go to session created here. Let's go back to cursor. So session created, and then click create, and then we're going to copy the webhook secret after we've created this. So let's click create here, copy the signing secret here. So let's copy that over, and let's go back to cursor. We're going to copy that to our .env.local file. It has a Clerk webhook secret here. So let's go to .env.local. We've got the Clerk webhook secret. Let's add this in here. We probably should have done this earlier to create the Clerk webhook, but we're doing that now, so that's okay. So now all of these changes are done. Let's double check to see if this is actually going to work. So we've got this set up here. We'll actually see message attempts to this webhook as well as we'll see them to the webhook in Polar. If this is working, we're going to refresh this. We might just try signing out and signing back in again. I'm going to sign out because we need to do a login to basically trigger to check that we are subscribed. Let's continue here. This should now check with the webhook to see whether we're subscribed or not. So let's open the console here, see what is going on. Let's refresh this and let's check the console. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to try actually signing up with a different account here. So we're going to do chris2@test.com. Let's go to sign up. So we're going to do chris2@test.com. Enter a password here. Let's continue. So I've just created a new account here. Obviously we're getting this upgrade message because we don't have access to this. Let's just go through the checkout here, so chris2@test.com with Polar, just to make sure that this works, and then see what it checks basically once we have signed up. So we're going to add a name here. Let's subscribe to Polar. So let's just sign up with a new account here. So let's just do another of my email addresses here. So when we create an account here, there is something going on that is not loading this app correctly. If we have a look in the file here, it's basically saying violation, potential permissions policy, violation, payment is not allowed in this document. So I think, again, if we go back to the Polar webhook here, there's actually nothing happening in this Polar webhook. If we go to the dashboard here, there is a bunch of failed requests to the Clerk webhook here. So this is, again, just saying that payment is not allowed in this document. So let's copy this over to Claude Code. I think this is just basically an issue with our local development environment and not being able to check this functionality here. So we're just going to copy and paste these back into Claude Code here and basically just get it to help us fix this issue so that we can test payments on our local development server. So Claude Code has fixed this issue basically by adding some headers to allow the payment and credentials features here. But also I have managed to update my webhooks to the ngrok URL here, just in case that this wasn't working on local tunnel as well. So I'm actually going to kill that terminal and just keep this ngrok one running here because it seems to have allowed me to create a webhook in Clerk and in Polar using this ngrok webhook URL instead. So we're going to try it with that instead. We're not getting any errors in the console here now, and we've managed to log into our account. So let's create a test app here. Let's just do a web app. and then we're going to skip and create this step so that we get into the app. Now let's have a quick look in the console to see what is going on behind the scenes here. It doesn't seem like it's checking subscription status. Maybe it did that already when I kind of logged in. And what I'm going to do is basically just upgrade. So let's go through this upgrade process with Polar. And what we want to check here is that after subscribing, it's going to allow us to use this feature, which it has done now. It's just checked that. So I go in the console here. So we can see that on this account after subscribing, we're now allowed to use this AI feature here. We don't have a way of managing our payments. We're going to actually add that as the next step here. And also if I sign out, I want to try signing back in and then basically seeing if this is going to allow me to access the same features by checking my subscription status. And we should be able to go to the webhooks in Clerk. So we can log back in here and we see we've got access to these features still, which is great. So we can close that and open that. Let's go to Polar and let's have a look at this webhook here. So we've got basically successful events on this webhook, some successful deliveries. If we go to Clerk and if I refresh this as well, there's also a successful event message attempt in Clerk as well. So that is now all working correctly. What we're going to need to do is when we go live on our production environment, we want to change these webhooks and the webhook secrets to use the production URL for our application. And we can change that basically in our code before we push it live, and also in the webhooks here in Clerk and in Polar when we set up the actual Polar production environment as well. And that's basically the same as creating a sandbox account in Polar. You just create an actual account in Polar and you do all the same things that we've done here and just change the details in our app project. So that seems like it's now working correctly, and we're going to go on to the next step now, which is adding account management so that I can update my subscription in Polar, basically adding the kind of customer portal to this to allow a user to kind of manage their subscription from this profile menu up here. So now we've added payments to our app. Let's add the link to the customer portal. You need to have this in your app so that someone who's signed up and upgraded their account, so this account is upgraded in my app here, which means I can use this feature of like the AI assistant to help me basically answer any questions and create any documents in my kind of account here in this version of Scribe. What we need to do is we need to show in the user account here in this drop down menu basically a link to manage my subscription, and then that's going to take me to the Polar customer portal, and it would be the Stripe customer portal if you're using Stripe. It's going to take me to the Polar customer portal to manage my subscription in this app. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clear the conversation in Claude Code. One thing that I'm going to do before I do anything else here actually is I'm just going to do a /init in Claude Code, because I realized I don't have a claude.md file in this project, and I want to create a Claude MD file to give my agent the right context every time I start a new chat here, and that is going to help us get a little bit better results because Claude Code is going to have better context of our app as we're building it. So I would recommend doing /init after you've got kind of your first version of your app up and running, even in a very, very basic form. And then as you continue to build your app, to continue adding rules and instructions to your claude.md file as you go. So you can see here, Claude is basically going to go through and figure out. So this has now created a Claude MD file in our project. So I'm going to say yes, allow it to create that Claude MD file. You can see it's created this claude.md file in this project, and this basically just outlines everything that Claude needs to know when it starts working on the project. So basically an overview of the data model, authentication flow, convex functions, and all of that stuff that Claude will need to know basically. So that has now created that Claude MD file. Now let's add our customer portal. So we're going to do /clear again to start a new conversation. Again, just do that every single time you build a new feature, and let's add our customer portal in. So as part of this prompt here, what I'm actually going to do is go to the polar.sh documentation for the customer portal here and just copy this URL over to Claude Code so that it has access to the documentation as we build. So let's add a customer subscription management portal link in the profile menu in the navigation. I'm going to say called manage subscription. This should link to the Polar customer portal following the documentation here. And I'm going to put this into plan mode so that we can plan this first, because this might require a few complicated steps of like using the Polar webhook or the Polar API to be able to figure out basically what customer we are in this app, and then link to the right customer portal in a separate browser window to actually be able to manage our subscription. So now Claude has put together a plan for building this feature. So essentially we're going to add the manage subscription item into the profile dropdown. The Polar customer portal requires a server-side API route to generate an authenticated portal URL. The menu will call this API directly, find files to modify. Here's the files it's going to modify. Add a convex query as well so that that connects to our database in Convex. And then here's the implementation details. And we're going to verify that by basically logging in as a subscribed user and then going to that link and seeing if it opens the Polar customer portal. So I'm going to do yes and manually improve edits and let Claude Code build this feature. So now Claude Code has built this feature for us, and you can see if I click here in the menu, I can see this manage subscription link here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to check it in the cursor browser here. I'm actually going to go into my browser and check this here just so that it can open up a new tab here and I can see how it would actually work like in a more realistic kind of environment. So let's click manage subscription. We're going to see what happens here. This should open the Polar. Okay, so that's now opening the Polar custom. I can change my subscription here basically, and I can change my plan, view my subscription and see my past orders, and that is linking to the Polar customer portal completely correctly. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this open in a new tab. So let's just make that change here as well. Update this so that the customer portal opens in a new tab, not the same tab. So let's get Claude Code to make this change. And then one thing that I want to do here as well is I want to actually highlight that this is a pro user account now. So I want to say that this is a pro user in the menu. So that's now done. So if I go in here, let's try clicking the manage subscription link again. That's loading, opening up a new tab, and that is loading the customer portal, which is perfect. That's great. That's all working correctly. So that's now done. So let's add a pro label into the drop down here for the user's profile. Let's add a pro label into the user's profile drop down when they are on a pro account. So that will then add a label there for us. And this is how good Claude Code actually is at building stuff, is that it figured it all out from that documentation, from the app that we've already set up. If I click here now, we're going to see a pro badge in my account drop down, which is great. The customer portal is working correctly. So if I sign up and pay for this, I can then go to my customer portal, manage that subscription, cancel my subscription, and completely manage my paid subscription from there. So now we've done that, let's get into building a couple of features and changing the design of the app slightly here as well and documenting that in our code base. So let's go on to just tweaking the design a little bit for this app. I want to do a few things here with the design. The first thing I want to do is I want to change the font pairing that we've got here. I think adding in custom fonts to your app, especially if they're a good pairing of fonts or more professional looking fonts and fonts that aren't just inter as well, will have a massive impact on how kind of professional your app looks and make it kind of stand out against a lot of other vibe coded apps. I'm actually pretty happy with the way that the UI looks for a lot of this stuff. I'm actually just going to add some soft shadows to like cards and navigation elements. And the second thing I want to do here is I want to show you how to set up the front end design skill in Claude Code. And then I want to show you how to create some documentation around your kind of design guidelines and your design system inside of your code base. So what we're going to do here is we are going to first choose some fonts that we want to use. I'm just going to go to Google Fonts. So what I want to do here, and if you're looking for inspiration for this, you can go and have a look at Dribble or Mobbin or any other kind of visual inspiration for like apps and software here, and you can see like have a look at some font pairings that other applications are using here. I kind of want to go for this is a little bit, that's a little bit too much, but it kind of what I'm aiming for is like this kind of serif, like serif style heading, and then a sans serif style, like a very readable sans serif for like the body copy and all the rest of the fonts. So I'm going to go from that as like my inspiration, and the fonts that I've kind of landed on here or that I want to use, that I like the look of, is I'm going to use Libre Baskerville. I don't even know if that's how to say it. Baskerville is a classic serif font that is very traditional font, and it is always going to look great basically. I think this is a very readable and very like professional looking serif font. So we're going to use Libre Baskerville. And then the other one I want to use here for all of my body copy is a font called Manrope, which is like a little bit more characterful, like sans serif font here compared to like Inter and Roboto and like all of those other very like classic fonts. And this is going to give us again a little bit more of that kind of professional look and feel for our app. In terms of installing the Claude Code front end skill, here is a post. This is from a little while ago now, from November 13th, but it still like gives you the right instructions to do it. Basically you copy these commands, so /plugin marketplace, add Anthropic's Claude Code, and then install the plugin. And so we're going to install this front end design at Claude Code plugins basically, and that will install the front end skill into Claude Code for you so that you can use it. And you can use it just by saying use the front end design skill. So what we're going to do here is going to go back to cursor. I'm going to clear this chat in Claude Code, and then I'm going to add in a prompt here to update the fonts and use the front end design skill and do a few other design changes in here as well. We're going to do that, and then we're going to see what it looks like. And then after that, we're going to document that design system and those design kind of guidelines after we've done the design here. So let's write the prompt here. So what I've put in here is I've just said I want to make some design improvements to the app. Primarily, I want to switch out the fonts to use Libre Baskerville from Google Fonts for the headings with a medium tight letter spacing. So like tightening up that letter spacing is just going to make this app again feel a little bit more premium, a little bit more professional, and MamRope from Google Fonts for all of the text in the app. I also want to add soft shadows and subtle animations and loading states to the app throughout, especially on elements like cards, tabs, and the top navigation. I'm going to add in something else here as well, like don't change any of the colors or styling. Use the front end design skill to make these changes. And we're just going to change this to edit automatically and send that off to Claude Code. So this is going to use that front end design skill. And you can see here, it's invoking that skill front end dash design. So we're going to allow it to use that, which basically has all these instructions here, which you can show more to like view all of the instructions there. But it basically just tells Claude Code not to do AI slop design in like a very detailed instruction. This is going to go through and do those design changes in our app. And you can see it's broken down this to-do list here of update the fonts, update global CSS, enhance the card component, enhance the tab navigation, enhance the feature card, enhance the knowledge card with animations, and then add loading state animations to app layout, enhance header with shadow on scroll and animations, which is great. So they're all the things we want to do. And if you wanted to be more specific about the design changes that you want, you can be more specific about that, or you can break them down more like one at a time and just do like, I just want to do the font changes first. I just want to do the navigation changes next. I just want to do the drop down interaction changes next. I'll do the skeleton screens next. And you can add all of these things from a design point of view. I'm just trying to go through this all in one go. And what I'm going to do while this is going on is we're just going to set up the next prompt here. So I'm going to open up a new Claude Code chat here. And I'm just going to say, go through the app and document the entire design system and styling guidelines in a file called designsystem.json. This file should outline styling for all components, fonts, typography, colors, and icons so that I can reference this in future for AI coding tools to follow these guidelines for anything it builds. And what we could do here as well is to document this design system and then add that design system into like a set of rules in Cursor, or create a skill in Claude Code that has that kind of documented design system to follow those rules specifically. I'm just going to set this up now. Let's go back to our Claude Code that is running here, and then let's wait for it to finish making these design changes. So Claude Code has now finished running, and I do find this front end design skill tends to be a little bit conservative sometimes. We can see some stuff that it's added here, like this little subtle animation of like the icon getting bigger when I click on each of these tabs. You might not be able to see it on the video. And things like on the knowledge, you've got a subtle shadow on here, and when I hover over this, it goes up, it animates up with like the icon loading in at the same time as well. And then there are some other things in here as well around like animations on things like modals, where you've got that X kind of spinning, which is quite nice. All of these little details do add an extra element to your products. The one thing that it hasn't changed though is it hasn't changed the fonts. So let's ask Claude Code to fix this. So let's just say it looks like the fonts haven't changed in the app. Can you identify why this hasn't worked and fix the issue so that we use the new fonts? So we're going to get Claude Code here to check this font issue so that it can update the fonts. Basically, this generally tends to happen sometimes, but it's often just to do with a CSS issue that it hasn't picked up quite right. It's something to do with Tailwind versions and how it uses the CSS. So it's probably added it into the code, but it's just not updating it quite right. I think these fonts are actually going to make the biggest change in this app design. So now it's going to go through and fix this issue. There we go. So you can now see in the app here that we're using these new fonts. We've got this heading font of Baskerville, and we've got the body font of ManRope. I want to increase the weight of the body font here. Let's say to Claude, let's increase the weight used for ManRope in the app. So I want to increase this weight a little bit. I think it's a little bit too thin at the moment and too delicate, just to make it a little bit more readable with a little bit heavier weight here on the text. So that is updated updated that. Let's refresh this. So you can see now, this is looking a little bit better now. This is slightly more readable. This text is more readable, a little bit thicker and a little bit less delicate, which is great. And this is updated across all of the elements in our app as well. So this is now looking really, really strong. Okay, great. So now we've got our documents here as well. So we can start writing our document with the document editor, which is great. We can go back to knowledge here. We've got our AI assistant here, which is now using this. So there's one more thing that I want to do on the design. We want to document our entire design system and styling for the components. So let's send that off. And I'm actually going to do one other tweak to the design as well here whilst we're doing the kind of design stuff. I'm going to do /clear on the conversation with Claude Code. And one thing I'm going to add is I'm just going to add my little character icon to Scribe. I've used this before for like building an app called Inkwell as well. It's just a little character that I like to use for any of these writing apps basically that I build, just to make it a little bit more fun. And I feel like, and we're going to name the AI assistant here, we're going to name the AI assistant Scribble, which feels like a little bit more fun. Maybe it doesn't fully align with the brand kind of direction for the app, but I think it's going to be fun. So now I've added this little pencil kind of character here that I like to use. We're going to go back to Claude Code and we're going to say, let's add the icon, what's it called, in the public folder, and add it to the public folder. Any images or files you want to add, just add it to the public folder here. It's called logo.png. I want to add logo.png as an app icon before the Scribe name in the header, and also rename the AI assistant to Scribble and use the icon there as well. Make sure the icon is in the correct aspect ratio. I've just added that aspect ratio piece in because AI often gets the aspect ratio wrong when it adds in images. I have found it will like squish them or do them square or like do something where it kind of makes it look a bit weird. So we're just getting it to use the right aspect ratio here, and this should do this change pretty quickly. I can see the logo. It's a cute character with a tilted rectangular shape and eyes and mouth. So it's going to add the logo PNG before the Scribe name and rename the AI assistant to Scribble, which is great. It's now asking us just to make these edits. So let's allow it to make those edits and import that image. And now you can see it's added that image in the top left here to Scribe. We're getting some errors whilst it's building it. It should hopefully fix this. What we can also see here now is that this design system.json file has been created, which basically is outlining all of the different colors, all of the different components, typography, scale, prose, spacing, the different border radiuses, shadows, animation, all of this stuff is being detailed here in this design system.json file, which is great. So we're going to allow it to create that file. I'm going to close some of these as we're building. And also we can see that Scribble has been added to Scribe, and it's even added in the icon here for us. Ask me anything about your app. I can help with PRD, features, and more. So we've now got Scribe here, our PRD, our tech stack, our knowledge, our features. Basically, this is now helping us to build this Scribe tool to help us plan our application fully from our idea basically to a full application. So now we've done the design stuff, let's get on to actually building a couple of features here. So let's start to build or like change some features, make some improvements to some of the features in this app now. And one of the things that I want to do here on this features tab here with this Kanban board is actually to allow the user to create their own columns and edit the names of those columns in the Kanban board, and also reorganize those columns if they want to as well, and maybe even change the color here. So you can add like features basically from your feature lists that you've got in this release view here, but you can't actually edit much on this progress view. You can't edit any of the columns. I'm just going to clean up some of this stuff here in my Claude Code chats. So we have this Claude Code chat here that just created the design system JSON file, and whatever it's outlined everything that it's done in our app. I'm going to close that. Let's leave the local environment file open for now. And in this chat here, we're just going to do /clear again. And then I'm going to add in a prompt to add this feature. And the way that I like to build features, and the reason why I want to build a couple of features here before we actually deploy anything as part of this full build kind of tutorial, is to give you my framework for building features. Now, what you can do is you can use more like a spec-driven development framework here to actually outline the specification for like a big feature that you want to add. So like if I wanted to add in an MCP server to this app, for example, as a feature, I might want to use an AI like Claude or use Claude Cowork, or even just use Claude Code to like basically interrogate like how that is going to be built. But what I'm going to do here is just to use a simple framework that you can use to kind of get like 80 to 90% of the same results, and to actually keep you like building momentum on building your app as well. It will make you much faster to just use this framework. So the first thing I like to do is to give the AI context of what I'm building. And I might have broken this down earlier in the video, so apologies if I'm repeating myself here. So let's give the AI context of what we're building here. So I'm going to say I want to make the progress view on the features tab more useful by adding some functionality to help users customize it to their own project. So adding this context gives the AI an idea of like why we're building this, and this will help it build it in the right way, basically. Then I'm going to say what I actually want the functionality to be. I'm going to change this into plan mode as well, because we're going to get Claude Code to create a plan for us first. I'm going to say, let's allow users to create their own columns, to delete columns, to rename columns, to change the header color of the columns, and to reorder the columns and collapse the columns if they want. So that's what we're going to do here. I think that's all the changes. So that's outlining the things that we want to add. What we can now add to this prompt framework is we can also add the user journey. So how would a user engage with these things? So I'm actually just going to let Claude Code do this for me. And you don't have to include all the parts of this framework. I'm going to let Claude Code figure out what it thinks is the best implementation of adding these features, but you can be more specific with the user journey here. So you might want to say, well, the user clicks a drag handle in the top of the column and then drags it to the right and left. And I want to add animations to the user to do that. But I'm just going to see what Claude Code builds, because often it builds a better version for you than what you can think if you let it kind of do that. And then I'm going to kind of tweak it from there. And we can always get it to revert if we want to. The last part of this is you want to add any technical or design kind of context here as well. So if you're using a specific API, or you're using like a specific design style, or you want to change the design in any way, you can add that to the prompt here as well. I'm not actually going to do that. So I'm just going to leave it in plan mode, send this prompt off, and we're going to get Claude Code to create a plan for this feature for us. So now that we sent this off to Claude Code, basically Claude Code is going to ask us some questions to clarify what we actually want to do here. So it's figured out how it's going to do it, but it just needs some answers on what we want to do with certain things. And it will ask us in the chat in the extension here. So should custom columns be scoped per app? So each app has its own column configuration, or per user, the same column across all apps. So we're going to do per app here for sure. Data handling, how should we handle existing features when columns are deleted or renamed? So we can move it to the default column. So basically we'll add those features to the backlog. I think we should do that basically, or we can require reassignment. So users must manually reassign features before deleting a column, or prevent deletion. So let's do require assignment. And then default columns, should there be any default columns when creating a new app or start completely empty? So let's start with defaults, which is the backlog, in progress, testing complete, and live. So we're going to do that one, and then submit our answers to Claude Code. And that's the benefit of using plan mode as well. It's going to ask you those questions before you actually build a feature. So if you're building anything big beyond small changes, I would absolutely recommend starting in plan mode and getting it to build it from there. So now Claude Code has created a plan here for us. So let's go through the plan, and always read these plans, always read the detail here. So it's basically adding in customizable Kanban columns. It's going to update the database schema, and it's going to change some stuff in the Convex backend to allow for this as well. It's going to add a migration here and some UI components, as well as progress view refactoring. So it's going to refactor the whole of the progress view to accommodate for these changes. So this is an example where AI has kind of figured out here, and Claude Code has figured out here, that this change might be a little bit bigger than what we expected. We just thought we were adding in a bit of simple functionality, but Claude Code knows that this is going to take a lot more to actually go through this. So what we're going to do, and it says to verify this, we're basically going to have to rerun Convex and then run the migrations, and then basically just test that this is going to work after that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say yes and auto accept to this plan, and then let Claude Code go away and build these features. And this might take, 5, 10, 15 minutes to go away and build this properly. Going through this to-do list and doing it this way by planning before you build is going to give you a much better result in the end. So Claude Code has now gone through and made all of these changes. So it's basically updated the feature, the progress view here, to allow me to add different columns. It's basically saying before I use it, I need to do npx convex dev to deploy the schema changes, npx convex run, and then npm run dev to test the UI. So let's go and do that. We're just going to stop these processes from running by doing Control and C in these terminals. So we're going to do this for the backend and for the front end here. And then we're going to do npx convex dev to get our Convex backend up and running. And then we're going to do a new terminal here, and we're going to do npx convex run, which seems like it's giving an error here. I'm just going to do npm run dev just to see if we actually needed to do that step. Sometimes the AI can like say things that you don't actually always need to do. So let's just run this, go to the progress view. I'm going to add in a column and say like test column. We're going to choose this to be blue, and I'm going to add a column here. That's going to add that column. Let's add another column, say test 2. Let's do green, and then let's allow these to be dragged around. So that's working. That's working pretty nicely. Like the animation there is working okay as well, which is quite nice. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Convex and just see if this is actually working. So let's go to the data in our Convex database and have a look at features. This table is empty. We can have a look at apps here. So we've got the Scribe apps columns. We've got test 2 and test column. So it's correctly added the columns here. There are no features because we don't have any yet. This is added in the columns, and it's got the order here in our app as well. So this seems to be working correctly. So we're actually just going to remove this terminal with npm npx convex build, and I think that is completely fine. So that feature is now working. We also have the ability to collapse these columns and to rename these columns as well, which opens up this pop-up in the same style with that animation, and we can delete these with a friction pop-up to delete that as well, which is perfect. So we've now added in this feature to our features tab here in the app. I'm just going to try adding a feature in here as well. So let's say like build, add custom columns to Kanban view. We're just going to add this into test 2. We're going to add list release to the MVP, and we're going to say let's do Kanban or Kanban. So we've got this in here now. So if I go over to the progress view, this is added to this. I can also drag it into test 2 between these two columns, and I can also delete this. So let's add a delete modal to the features, the same as deleting the columns. Let's get that updated. So let's add a delete dialog for deleting features in the same style as deleting a column. And I'm just going to do this in the same chat with Claude Code, because then it will have context of the changes that it just did. So we'll understand how to basically where that kind of dialogue is for the delete column functionality. So it's going to look at that. It's creating this new file, which is a delete feature modal, which is hopefully going to be in the same style here as the delete column modal. So let's just check this. Oh, it hasn't actually finished doing that yet. So Claude Code has finished adding this delete modal. So let's just check that this is working here. So this is the delete feature here, and we can go delete column here. So we're getting these same pop-ups here. So I usually want to delete, add custom columns to Kanban, add custom columns to Kanban view. This action cannot be undone, which is great. And if I click delete, that is then deleted. And so that feature is now done. So we now have that feature completely done for our app, which is perfect. So now let's go on to fully testing our application before we actually deploy it to a real domain. So now we're happy with our app. We're almost ready to deploy it. The last thing that we have to do before we deploy, or the last couple of things that we have to do before we deploy, first is to do a full test on our complete app, just to make sure that everything is working in our app, that everything is working correctly in our back end, in our front end, in our database, all of the stuff that we've set up here in our APIs, all of that stuff is working correctly in our app. And what we're going to do is, usually I would recommend using these AI testing tools like TestSprite or CodeRabbit, two great ones to start using if you're interested in doing a full, complete audit of your application that you've built and find anything that you might be missing. But because we're building with Claude Code, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a security review directly in Claude Code, which you absolutely can do if you know the things that you're prompting it for. What I've pasted in here is I've just pasted in a prompt from my master prompt library, which you can get access to over on my free kind of vibe coding masterclass over on school.com/learn vibe coding. But this prompt basically helps us review everything in our app. I'm actually going to take out one of these things because we definitely don't need to do multi-tenancy. And it's going to create a report, a document. So format the report so it could be shared with stakeholders or investors during due diligence. I'm just going to say create this report as MVP reports.md in the planning folder. And we're going to go ahead and submit this to Claude Code. I'm actually going to put it into plan mode so it can plan this security and code review kind of audit before it actually goes through and does it all. And this is going to basically just review our application to make sure that it's ready to deploy. And then we can address anything that comes up here in this security audit as we go through. The thing that we're going to do after this, once Claude Code has done this, is we're going to get our app ready to deploy on a domain, and we're going to use Vercel to actually deploy it. So there's a few things that we have to do when we get to that stage as well. Mostly just reconfiguring environment variables, adding that to Convex, Convex, switching to a production environment in Convex, making sure that we're ready for our app to be deployed on a domain. But let's see what Claude Code comes back here for this audit. So now Claude Code has created our full report here. I'm going to drag this over to this window here so that we can see exactly what we've got going on in our app. So basically Claude Code, because we put this in plan mode, he's done the security audit, and then it has basically identified all the things that it needs to fix here. So critical fixes, high priority, medium priority, and hardening. So what we want to do here, just do critical fixes and high priority here. So we need to fix subscription webhook authorization, add input validation, length limits, implement rate limiting. Rate limiting is really important to make sure that we've got in our app. Add cross-entity authorization checks, authentication to scrape endpoint, fix XSS in scrape URL handling, add content security policy headers. So let's just say to Claude, we've got this summary here in this file, basically unauthenticated AI API endpoints. So this is critical. It says like effort, like 1 to 2 hours, but we're just going to get Claude Code to go through and pretty much do all of this in one go. Let's close that MVP report. I'm just going to go into basically tell Claude Code what to do here and say, let's just fix the critical and high priority things here. So now Claude Code is saying it's going to fix the critical and high priority security issues. So basically we've now got a to-do list here of all of the things that it's going to go through and do. So it's a lot of authorization in Convex, basically authorization, authentication, add security headers, and adding rate limiting middleware, which is probably going to ask us some questions about that when we get to it. We don't necessarily have to do that, but it can stop people from like spamming an API. If you've got an AI API inside of your application, I think it's generally good to do. So let's just let Claude Code go through and fix all of these issues. And then once that's done, we'll do a final test of our app and then get it ready to deploy. So now Claude Code has gone through here and it has fixed all of the critical and high priority issues here. So authorization in Convex functioned is fixed. Authentication on API endpoints is fixed as well. And then this XSS and SSRF prevention, which I don't even really know what that is as a non-technical user, but that's the great thing about using these tools and using these prompts that are kind of preset to like figure these things out, is that you're going to find stuff like this and it's going to fix it. And you're going to be grateful that you went through those steps, through that process. We've got some rate limiting here as well for our API usage. And this is added in here. The security report has been updated at MVP report as well. So basically this is now updated on like all of the changes that it's done. And this is a great way to use Claude Code as well, is just to continually update these files as you do stuff. Now, one thing we've got going on here in our app, oh, it is working. It was showing a 404 error there for some reason, but still all of the functionality is working in here, which is great. We want to just do a last check here that things are working. Let's just check our AI functionality here is working with the Claude API. So I can see you're planning to build an application with a modern tech stack. Okay, great. AI functionality is working there. We might want to add in some more features into the chat to be able to clear the chat or start a new chat and save chat history, for example. But I just want to check that all of these things are working. That's going to save. There's unsaved changes, then it saves. This is our stack. So we can extract that from the PRD or edit and add different things to our tech stack here. We can remove different things. So let's click done. Add in knowledge documents here. So quickly create pricing strategy, market validation, customer persona, and features. We can extract features from our PRD here as well. And we can add a new release, which is be release 1, which we can add. That adds a new release here, and we can add features to this. We can generate feature ideas for this app, which we're going to see what this functionality actually does. So here we've got more features that we can add to this app, and we can just click to add these features to our feature list and then drag them into, so we're going to drag this one into, we can't actually move that for some reason, so that is slightly broken, but we'll go and fix that. For now, we're going to ignore that, and we can create new apps here as well, which is great, and we can manage our subscription. We're on the Pro subscription, which means we get access to the AI assistants. And if I log out here of my account, you can see that we have the login page here using Clerk to be able to log in to our app. So that is everything we need to do for the security audit. And now let's get on to actually deploying our app so that real people can start to use it. So let's get this app ready to deploy. And in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear the chat in Claude Code here. And then all I'm going to ask Claude Code is to say, give me a step-by-step plan to getting everything ready to deploy using Vercel. And then we're going to send that to Claude Code. And what this is going to do is going to basically give me a plan to actually deploy this app to a domain using Vercel. There are some things that I know that we need to do here. For example, we have this .env.local file here, which has all of our secrets in basically for this app. We need to add these to our environment variables in Convex so that all of those are secure. We're already ignoring these files in this code base anyway, but we need to have those environment variables saved securely in Convex. What we also need to do is we need to be able to switch in Convex between the development version and a production deployment. And then in Vercel, what we're going to do is we're going to deploy from GitHub. So we also need to push our app to GitHub to update all of our code in GitHub. We're then going to use GitHub to push that code, that application, onto a live domain. And we're going to use a domain that I've already bought for this already. I'm just going to use scribe.co. I'm going to set it up just on a Vercel domain to start off with, and then I'll show you how to connect a custom domain to it after that as well. But once Claude Code has gone through this, it's basically just going to give us a breakdown of everything that we need to do to actually get this deployed. So here's our deployment plan. So based on my analysis, here's your step-by-step deployment plan. And this looks like a lot. Claude is very verbose generally, so it's a very long deployment plan here. Optional improvements as well, so like rate limiting warning. Your current rate limit is in memory, which won't work reliably on Vercel's multi-instance serverless functions. Production, consider switching to Upstash or Redis with a rate limiter. So we should actually probably do that before we deploy, is to use Redis for rate limiting on our API usage. We've got a bunch of other references and stuff in here, but basically this breaks down to number one, prepare external services. So we need to deploy Convex to production. So npx convex deploy basically deploys your schema and functions to Convex production. Note the production Convex deployment value and the next public Convex URL. So let's just go through this step by step as we kind of go through this plan. So let's do npx convex deploy. That should allow us to create a production deployment in Convex. So here we go. We've got our production deployment here, the name, and we've got our next public Convex URL here as well. Do you want to push your code to your prod deployment exuberant buzzard 659 now? We're going to say yes. So let's do that. So there we go. We have now deployed our Convex functions to our production development in Convex. We need to keep an eye on like these pieces of information here because we're going to need to use them again. So number two is configure Clerk for production. So let's go to Clerk. I'm going to resize this window here as well so that we've got the instructions next to what we're doing. We've got Clerk open already here. So let's go to Clerk. This is what we're using for this. So number one, go to Clerk dashboard. And this really just shows you how easy it is to just ask these AI tools exactly what you need to do and then just follow it step by step. So go to the Clerk dashboard. Here we are. Create or select your production instance. So we need to create a production instance here. So let's create a production instance and clone our development instance. So let's go continue. Application domain is going to be on. So we say like add your Vercel domain to allowed origins. You'll update this after getting your Vercel URL. So we're going to do that after. For now, like the URL is going to be scribe.co. We're going to create an instance of that. We can change this later if we want to. So now we've created a production instance of Clerk, which is great. This will have all new users in it when people sign up, and it basically allows us to develop things on our application using the development instance in our local development version that we have running in Cursor with Claude Code. And then when we push it to production, when we make it live on our domain, we're going to be using the production kind of environment in Clerk. So copy your production Clerk secret key and next public Clerk publishable key. Set up a webhook endpoint. So it will be this, your domain.vercel.app/API/webhooks/clerk, and copy the webhook secret. So let's copy this over and go back to Clerk. So we need to set up a webhook. So let's go to configure, and then we're going to find webhooks in Clerk, and then we're going to create a new webhook here. So let's add an endpoint. Let's paste this URL in, and this is going to be your domain.vercel.app. So basically this is going to be scribe.co and /API/webhooks/clerk. That's what we need to do. We're going to need to subscribe to some events here as well. So it hasn't outlined that in the steps here. So let's just say like when we set up a webhook endpoint in Clerk, what events do we need to subscribe to? So Claude Code will be able to answer any of these questions for us. We need to subscribe to these 4 events in Clerk: user created, user updated, user deleted, and session created. So let's go back and search for these events. So it's going to be user created, deleted, and updated, and then also session created. So let's subscribe to that, and then let's create our endpoint in Clerk. And then we need to have this signing secret here. We're going to need to know. So let's go back to the step-by-step guide here. So that's the Clerk webhook secret. So now configure Polar for production. So we're going to go to Polar. So this is, let's close that. We've got Polar here. Let's close the app and let's close that. Let's close some of these tabs. We've got our sandbox instance here in Polar, basically. Now this is just for testing. So what we want to do is we're going to go to basically the actual version of Polar, not the sandbox. So that is just polar.sh. And so let's create a new organization for this and call this Scribe test. So what we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to create everything the same inside Polar that we had in the sandbox. So we need to create a product here. So let's go into Polar here and create a product. So let's do new product and we're going to call this Scribe monthly, your subscription. And we're going to do this as a recurring subscription. This is going to be monthly and we're going to do it for a fixed price of $29, and then we are going to create this product. We also need to create a checkout link here as well. So let's create a checkout link, and this is going to be Scribe, and then let's select the Scribe monthly product here. Let's double check in the sandbox what we've got set in the checkout link. In this checkout, we don't have any specific success URL, so let's just keep that the same. Let's create that link. So now we've got our checkout, and then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set up our Polar access token and our Polar webhook. So let's go into settings in Polar here, and we go down to the bottom, do new access token, select all, do expiration for no expiration, and let's just do Scribe production. Let's create that. We're going to leave this showing here so that we can access that. Actually, what I'm going to do here is, whilst we've got it, I'm just going to copy all of our environment variables here from our env.local file. So it says basically import project to Vercel, configure environment variables, add these in Vercel project settings, environment variables. I think we should actually use these in Convex. So let's just ask Claude Code here and say, I think the right approach for environment variables would be to add this to Convex. Can you check this is correct? So I think we can just add these environment variables into Convex here instead of adding them in Vercel. Okay, so it says, since all your external API calls are in Next.js API routes, all your secrets go into Vercel's environment variables, not Convex. Does that clarify things, or are you thinking of restructuring to run this in Convex? So I think we're fine there. So let's add all of these to Vercel, which is the next part of setting this up for deployment here. So we're going to need to add our Git repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open a new Claude Code here. Let's say push all of this code to this remote GitHub repository, this project to this remote GitHub repository, overwrite everything in the repo. So generally this is not the best way of doing it, but we're just going to quickly push all of this code to GitHub so that we've got this. It says the remote is already set up, which I thought we already had. There's a bit of a gap in between filming this tutorial, so I probably did the GitHub part earlier in this tutorial, maybe a little bit different. It's allowing it to commit all the changes here, and then we're going to push it to GitHub. Just committed, complete Scribe. Would you like to start a review? So we've committed that to GitHub. So let's allow git push in Claude Code here. This is going to push everything to GitHub so that it's ready to go. We need to add all of these variables in Vercel. So we've got our Polar access token. We're going to set up the Polar webhook in a minute. We're going to get our Polar checkout link as well. Let's go to our Vercel dashboard and create a new project here. So let's go to Vercel. We're going to go to overview and I'm going to go add new project. Let's create a new project. And then we are going to basically import a Git repository once this has pushed. So done, all the code has been pushed to this repository. 54 file changes, complete Scribe application. So let's go and check that in GitHub. Just make sure that this is updated. There we go. Okay, so this was 1 minute ago. It's pushed everything here. So we've got everything we need in this project ready to go. This is called Scribe. So let's just find Scribe and then let's import that. And then what we're going to do here is we are going to, it says Vercel will auto detect Next.js. Step 5, configure environment variables. So in this environment variables section here, what we're going to do is we can copy and paste, or we can import a .env file here. So let's try and just import this .env. So let's try and drag this in here. Okay, we can just, this is in Scribe, so let's just import this env file. So now I've added in all the environment variables here before we click deploy, and I'm just going to go through and add all of the different variables in here. So we've got the convex URL, which we've got from when we did npx convex deploy in the terminal back in cursor, and now I'm going to go through and just add everything else that we've got here. And we're going to go for some of this stuff, we're going to go from our .env.local file because some of this is correct. So the Anthropic API key, for example, we're going to use the same one. Let's put that into Vercel here. The Firecrawl API key, we're going to do that as well. And let's go for the Polar access token. It's going to be here. So let's copy that over. Let's go back to Vercel. Polar access token. We need the Clerk webhook secret, which is going to be here. So let's copy that and put that into the Clerk webhook secret. The Clerk secret key, which if we go to overview, what we should be able to see. So here we go. If we go into API keys in Clerk, we've got our publishable key down here, which we're going to copy. So Clerk publishable key, should we go back to here? So our Clerk publishable key, which is there, and we're going to go back to Clerk and we're going to get our Clerk secret key here as well, which we're going to copy. Go back to new projects, going to go Clerk secret key in there, and then convex deploy. We basically need our Polar checkout link. So let's go back to Polar and get our checkout link here. So let's get that checkout link, go back to Vercel, then our convex deployment here, which is in the convex dashboard. So let's go to convex and we should be able to go into our production instance in convex here. This should be on the dashboard, our deployment URL here, which we're going to copy. So this is our convex deployment, which you can paste into there, and then our Polar webhook secret, which is the last thing that we need to do here, which we're going to go to settings and we're going to create a webhook. So add an endpoint. So let's just get it to break down how we set up our Polar. So it's got here phase 3 initial deployment, click deploy. So update webhook URLs. Now that you have your Vercel URL, you go to Clerk dashboard webhooks, update endpoint to, and then we're going to go the Polar dashboard, update the endpoint to this basically. Let's just add this in for now for the webhook endpoint. Let's not create it. I'm just going to add it to Vercel here so that we have actually we don't have the webhook secret in here. So what we need to do is have a Polar webhook secret. So let's just create our Polar webhook here basically and do it to scribe.co. It's going to be scribe.co API Polar. We'll select this to raw and then we'll select all, create this webhook because we're going to update this webhook essentially. So we're going to update this webhook later. All we need is this secret here to put into the environment variables in Vercel. Let's put that in here. We now have all our environment variables in here, correct? These have been added. The project name is Scribe. We're just going to do this as Scribe test because I'll probably build some extra stuff in here and deploy this as the actual version of Scribe to a project called Scribe. And let's click deploy. And now Vercel is going to go through and deploy our app. So this is phase 3, the initial deployment here, and we're going to get our Vercel URL as we do this. Now this is going to flag anything that's wrong with the build as we go through here. So I'm fully expecting to get some sort of error in this deployment that we have to go back to our application and then fix with Claude Code. But let's see how it goes. And looking through the next steps here, we want to basically then verify that our app works, that sign up and sign in works, user syncs to Convex, so that appears in Convex in our dashboard, that we can create an app in a project, the AI chat responds, and the subscription flow works basically. And if I expand this in Vercel, you can see a bunch of stuff that Vercel is doing here. We don't really need to know what's going on here other than this is basically how we're deploying to a domain in Vercel, and then we're going to be able to point that domain basically at our custom domain so that people can access our app from the domain that we actually want them to access it from. And if you're doing this where you have, like in this project, this app is built to exist on a subdomain and the landing page will exist on the main domain, we can basically point our Vercel deployment at the subdomain that we want to use. So I would point this at app.scribe.dev or app.scribe.co basically. So here we go. You've just deployed a new project to Telescope, continue to dashboard, so we can add a custom domain here. And that is how you take your app from your Claude Code cursor setup that you've got running with local environment variables, and that is how you deploy it to an actual domain using Vercel, getting your environment secrets in there. We've got our production deployment in Convex here, so we can see our basically everything that we have in the development version, and we can see everything here. And once this loads in Vercel, we're going to be able to see the details of this deployment in this project. So here we go. We now have access to our app is deployed on this scribe-test-ashy.vercel.app. And what we can do to actually test this, so this is accessing our app now, it's built and live here. What we're going to do to test this is actually just take this domain here. We're then going to go back over to Clerk, go to our webhooks, and I'm going to change the webhook URL that we've got here. And we're going to edit this to basically this URL, which is the Vercel one, so that we can test that this works. And we're going to do the same in Polar. So I'm going to go back to Polar and I'm going to edit this, or we can update this URL here to this Vercel URL as well, and then just click save. That's going to update there. And now we can test our application actually works here. The one thing that is not showing is that we're not getting a Clerk login at all. So Clerk failed to load Clerk. There is a reason that Clerk is failed to load script here. So there is something happening here with Clerk basically. Clerk failed to load timeout. So let's go back to Claude Code and try and fix this issue. We'll start a new Claude Code chat here. So let's do a new Claude Code, and let's say on our deployed app, Clerk is failing to load with this error message. Help me understand what is causing this. Don't make any code changes yet. So let's see what's going on here with Clerk. I reckon it's just something between like the Clerk configuration, or I think it's because the domain actually is not set correctly. So if we go back to our Clerk project here, let's go to settings, because I think we set the domain to the wrong domain here. So it seems here that basically the issue is probably something relatively straightforward if you're a developer and you've used Clerk before and you know what you're doing. But because I'm non-technical, I'm just like figuring this stuff out as I go. Basically, the reason that this happened is because of Clerk and the way that the domain is configured in Clerk. So the way that we set up the production, basically the production deployment in Clerk was basically using scribe.co as the URL, which is the domain that we're going to use for our app. And so because this is set up to use this domain and it doesn't have all of these records in the domain basically set up, so add a CNAME record for Clerk pointing to frontend-api-clerk-services. So we need to do this stuff for the account portal and for the front-end API. We don't need to worry so much about the email stuff right now because, or maybe we should set up the email stuff because that's how people will get emails from Clerk when they sign up to our app. So let's just do this using the scribe.co domain here. So all we do is we click on domains in our project and we just add domain, and add a domain that we'll go for production, and then we're going to add a domain that we already own, which is scribe.co, which is this one here. And we can redirect scribe.co to www.scribe.co, which is ticked. So let's do that. So save. So we've now added our domain to this project. Go back to build and deployment. And let's go to scribe test here. This deployment is deployed to scribe.co. If I go to scribe.co, you can see that the app is live here, but Clerk is still not working because we basically haven't added those records for Clerk into, you can see here, we're still getting a Clerk error here that's not quite working. So we need to add these records for Clerk into the domain in Vercel. So let's go to domains in our Vercel account. So let's go to domains, let's go to scribe.co, let's go to configure, and let's go to the records section here. So what we need to add is we need to add a CNAME, and we need to add the information for Clerk pointing to this. So let's copy that to our clipboard, and it's for Clerk. So let's go back to domains. We're going to add Clerk. I'm going to add that as the value. We're going to add this CNAME record in here. Let's load all of these so we can see what's going on. So that's created that successfully. And then if we go back to Clerk, we can verify configuration, and that should hopefully, it should find a CNAME for accounts pointing at accounts.clerk.services. So let's add this. Basically, once we've got this set up, we should be able to click verify configuration, and that should be able to let us know that we've configured Clerk correctly in our domain. So this takes a little bit of time, but you can see here that this stuff is starting to get verified in Clerk now that we've added those DNS records. And if I go back to my app and refresh this, this should allow Clerk to work here essentially. So clerk.scribe.co failed to load in load script clerks.scribe.co, failed to load JS timeout. So we've got to figure out this issue here for Clerk before we can get this actually working. So everything here in Clerk is now green. It's just loading the SSL certificates for this domain. And I want to make sure that everything else is set up correctly here. So let's just double check. So the endpoint is set incorrectly here. So we need to set this as scribe.co and then save that. And we also need to go back to Polar and we need to change this back to scribe.co as as well, because this will make Polar and Clerk work. So let's go back to Clerk. We've got the endpoint for our webhook there is correct, so I'm glad we checked that. Let's go back to refresh. We're still getting an error with Clerk. Loading the script violates the following content security product policy. Note that script was not explicitly set, so we're getting failed to load Clerk with this error, basically, even though everything is configured in the domain settings with Clerk. So let's go back to Claude Code here. So I've just said here, I've set everything up correctly in domains for Clerk, and everything is using Scribe.co, and we're getting this error loading Clerk. Help me figure out what might be causing this issue. So the error is clear, the CSP is blocking the script. Interesting question is, why is Clerk trying to load from clerk.scribe.co instead of clerk.accounts.dev? This happens when you have a Clerk proxy configured. So attempting to load its JavaScript, you have a proxy domain configured in the Clerk dashboard. Clerk is set to use clerk.scribe.co as a proxy domain. So go to dashboard, configure domains, and look for the proxy section. So I don't think we have a proxy section set up here. I don't think we have a proxy in our domains section here. Satellites, no. I'm going to do something here. Let's just see if we can find proxy in here. Be in settings, no. Basically, it doesn't look like there is. Let's say there is no proxy set up. We need to figure out what's causing this. So I just took a screenshot of Clerk and I've added it as a screenshot in here to this project in Cursor, just so that I can reference it with Claude Code. So you can do @ and then choose a file in your project, basically. So we're going to choose this screenshot PNG file and then say, here are the settings in Clerk, help me figure out what's happening. There's no proxy set, but the front end API is set to clerk.scribe.co. So let's send that off to Claude Code. It's going to read this image and hopefully see the settings from the image. Generally, you can do this. So it will have a look at the image and extract any text from it. So the front end API set to clerk.scribe.co, which is pointing to front end -API-Clerk services. This is a custom domain configuration, not a proxy. It means Clerk will load JavaScript from that. Your CSP only allows scripts from clerk.accounts.dev, but Clerk is now trying to load from this. You need to update your content security policy in next.config.ts to allow your custom Clerk domain. Add clerk.scribe to. Okay, so basically, would you like me to make these changes to your Next? So let's say yes, make these changes. So we're going to make those changes. Then we're going to push everything. We're going to update that file in our GitHub repo, and then we're going to redeploy our app, and that should fix this issue. So now let's say to Claude Code, commit this change and push the updated config file to the remote GitHub repo so that I can redeploy on Vercel. So now Claude Code is basically going to commit this change in the project to Git so that we have the history of this, and then it's going to push this basically to our GitHub repo. So the changes have been committed and pushed to GitHub. Vercel should automatically pick up the new deployment. Once deployed, Clerk should load correctly. So let's go and see what's going on here. Let's have a look in GitHub, just make sure that this was updated. So let's refresh this. We should see that this was just updated now. Okay, perfect. And if I go into this file, you should be able to see that we've got this URL added in here, clerk.scribe.co. That's what is being allowed here, which is great. So now let's go back to Vercel and we want to do another deployment. So let's go to redeploy. We're going to redeploy production. We're going to deploy to this URL. So let's redeploy. Actually, I think redeploy here just redeploys with the previous code. So we're just going to go into this project actually. Now this should automatically update this so that we can actually use Clerk on our app. So let's just create a new deployment manually here. So Vercel should automatically deploy from anything that's updated in the main branch on our GitHub. But what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new deployment. So we're going to add this. We're just going to select the main branch here from the same GitHub repo, and we're going to create a new deployment because we want to deploy that updated file. I've tried reloading the app after this redeploy. Okay, so basically I figured out kind of what's going on here with the deployment is that my deployment wasn't triggering automatically in Vercel. You can see this one is just triggered automatically here with that push, is because I was using an old email for my commits in Claude Code rather than the email that was associated with my account on GitHub. So just that's not going to be a case if you're setting this all up from scratch, but just something to be aware of if you are struggling with Vercel deployment and it's not doing it based on the latest commit that you make to GitHub. This is now building and we're going to be able to hopefully get this all working with Clerk once this is finished building. We've got a new deployment from the update updated GitHub repository that we did, we finally have Clerk loading here. So this is the loading screen for our app. Now I've deployed this to scribe.co, but I actually would rather have deployed this to app.scribe.co and then have scribe.co as the landing page. What I can do here if I wanted to is just to add in the landing page into my code base if I didn't want to keep it separate, but I do kind of want to keep it separate. So I'm going to update that at some point in the future so that this is going to exist on the subdomain of app.scribe.co instead. Now let's sign in and see if this all works. So we're going to go to sign up with Clerk because we need to create an account first. We're going to create an account here. If I go to sign in, we don't have Google sign in added here, so we can add that later as well if we want. I just wanted to get email and password working first, but you can absolutely add in Google authentication using Clerk to get that set up and creating those settings in the Google console dashboard if you want to. Let's just test this for now to see that everything works here with Polar, with our production deployment for Polar as well. So let's create an account with Scribe. This is going to go into our app here, assuming that everything works correctly. Capture failed to load. This may be due to unsupported browser. Please try a different browser or disabling extensions if this continues to exist. We've got an issue here with the capture. So I've just gone back to Claude Code here and just asked it to check why this capture might not be working. I'm actually going to move this tab back over to here so that we're working back on the left-hand side here. Let's make this a little bit bigger so that we can see what's going on. So basically, found the issue. Your CSP configuration is missing the Cloudflare turnstile domains that Clerk uses for capture. According to Clerk's documentation, you need to add these to our next.config.ts file. So let's just add that. And now these changes have been made. And what we're going to do is we're going to commit and push to GitHub to trigger a Vercel deployment. So we're going to commit these changes that we've made to this file to our GitHub repository. And then we are going to trigger a new deployment on Vercel, basically to see if this will allow the capture to load for our app so that we can finally test it to make sure that it's working. You can see that this new build has been triggered here, which is great. Okay, so it seems that Scribe seems to now be working. We can log into our app on scribe.co. I can go create a new app. We're going to name this app Scribe. Of course we are. We're going to do this as a web app. Let's continue. And then we're going to add in a builder here, Claude Code. That's what we've been doing in Next.js, and React with Tailwind is in TypeScript as well. I don't think we need TypeScript in there as the other option. It's just all written in TypeScript. I'm going to use Convex for the backend, Convex for the database, Clerk for authentication, and then the Claude API, and then let's click create app. Now this is not doing something right here. Something in Convex is not working. If we go over to Convex and have a look at our data, we can see that nothing is being created when we're actually doing this from our app. So let's have a look in the console, and we're getting an error here. So fails to create app. Basically this is happening. So let's go back to Claude Code. We're going to try and fix this issue. So let's say when I log in on my production deployment and try to create an app, I get this message related to Convex in the console. Can you help me identify the issue and fix this? And so we'll get Claude Code here to go through and try and identify what is going on here with Convex. So basically the reason this is happening is because no user is being created when I sign in using Clerk because of something that's happening with Clerk. So it might be related to the webhook that we've got set up here. So we can see these sessions failed on the webhook. So there's something going on here that is not quite right on the webhook. Let's just see what Claude Code comes back with here. Let's just stop Claude Code here and say the Clerk webhook is failing. Help me get the Clerk webhook set up correctly for scribe.co as my production deployment so that it can fire correctly. And I think this is just a configuration issue in Clerk, to be honest. So here's what we need to do. So Clerk, go to dashboard, set your production instance, which we're in, go to webhooks, add endpoint, add this URL to the endpoint. So let's see, we've got API webhooks Clerk. That is correct. API webhooks Clerk. Select the events to subscribe to. Maybe we didn't. We selected the events here, so those were firing. We're subscribed to those events, which is great. Get the signing secret. After creating the endpoint, click on it to view the details. Copy the signing secret, add the secret to your production deployment, Clerk webhook secret, redeploy your application. So we're going to go into the environment variables in Vercel and just check that is set correctly, because that should be set correctly. Let's go to environment variables here. Scroll down. We've got Clerk webhook secret. This might be set to, that's 4bhi. Let's go to this one. It's 4bhi. That should be set correctly. This is the production deployment. So I'm not sure what is happening there. I'm just going to edit this. So it's the same. There's no change there. The webhook secret is set up correctly. The clerk webhook secret. So I'm not going to redeploy yet because I haven't changed anything here. So I've gone into the webhook in Clerk here just to see what's failing, and it looks like there's something here with null, which might be the reason why this is failing. I'm just going to copy and paste all of this over. We can get the raw version of that. I'm just going to copy and paste all of this over to Claude Code and then see what it says. So the failing webhook is showing this information in Clerk. The environment variables are set correctly for the webhook, and the endpoint is set correctly. So let's see what Claude Code comes back with here. The webhook is looking for session created, but looking at webhook handler, the session created event tries to query for an existing user first. The problem is when a new user sign up, Clerk fires user created nearly simultaneously if the user webhook hasn't been processed yet. However, this shouldn't cause a webhook failure. In the meantime, let me check if there's an issue with how Convex client is being authenticated. So it's saying the next public convex URL environment variable. So let's go and see what our next public convex URL environment variable is set to. It should be set to this here, which we're just going to go and have a look in our environment variables in Vercel. Let's have a look here. Next public convex URL is set to this. Let's edit that. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. So that's what it's set to. One thing. So let's say convex, the next public convex URL is set to, so that should be correct. Okay, so basically, I think there was an issue here that the Polar SDK was interfering with something here. The Polar SDK is configured with the sandbox server where it should be, and Polar access token is not set in production. However, the Polar function, the most likely issue is that we need to see the actual error. For a start, the Polar SDK should not be set to the sandbox. Let's change the Polar SDK to use production, not the sandbox. Read the docs to make sure we implement this correctly. So I don't know if that will fix the issue. I don't think it will. But if we go into Polar and have a look at the webhooks here, just refresh this to see if there's anything. There's no results. I mean, there's no results here because we got the settings wrong in our project here. So there we go. We're going to make that change from sandbox to production. Let's say commit this change and push to GitHub. So let's see if this fixes the issue. So Claude Code basically identified 3 issues here, which is causing the webhook failure. So there is a convex auth config issue. Basically, it has the wrong domain set in the convex config here. So it's just another step that we didn't do when we went to deploy. So Claude Code maybe didn't give us the full breakdown of exactly what we need to do to deploy. So we're just going to allow edits to these files, and it identified some other issues here as well. And all I've done for this basically was to copy like all the error messages that I was getting when I logged into account and didn't get a user created in Convex. So this is on scribe.co. I logged in, copied these errors from the console back into Claude Code to see what was going on. And then it's identified these issues and fixed that. It's also checking the env.example file to basically update something else that was not quite working here as well. So summary of fixes, it's fixed config auth, convex auth.config.js. So that's processing the clerk issuer URL as clerk.scribe.co. That's going to be the main issue that's going on here. It's also added a couple of other things, and it says before deploying you need to update your production environment variables, add clerk issuer URL or your custom clerk domain. So we're going to add clerk issuer URL. We're going to rename some of these clerk variables as well. So let's go and do that. So we also have to, in Clerk, verify our Clerk JWT template in the Clerk dashboard. So let's go and do these things quickly, and then we can push this to GitHub and redeploy. So let's first go into Vercel. And let's go to settings and environment variables here. Let's add in these new environment variables. So let's add a new environment variable here. So let's add this clerk issuer URL. Let's go back here and let's change this to clerk.scribe.co. Let's add that. Let's add another one here. Well, actually, we just need to save that to add that in. So that's added that environment variable. I'm not going to redeploy yet because we're going to make some changes to these other variables here as well. So we're going to rename next, so public clerk after sign in URL to this. Let's go back to Vercel. Public clerk after sign-in URL. Let's edit that. We're going to call that this. Sign-in fallback redirect URL. So we're going to change that to that. We're going to also change after sign up URL to this one. Sign up fallback redirect URL. After sign up URL is here. So let's change that, save that variable. That is going to update there. So those variables have now been updated. So let's go to configure our JWT templates in Convex. So let's go to, in Clerk. So let's go to configure and JWT templates. So let's go JWT templates. We've got Convex already set up here, which should be fine because this was copied over from our development instance of Clerk. Ensure you have the Convex template with the audience set to Convex. This issuer should match your Clerk issuer URL. So let's have a look at this template. Clerk issuer URL. So that's right, that's set correctly. So let's go back here. So that is set up correctly. Now we have to do basically run npx convex deploy. Let's do this again. Let's stop this using Control-C in this terminal and do npx convex deploy, and let's do yes. We want to deploy that to our production deployment now. And there is an issue here now. Basically, you're currently developing against your development deployment. Your production deployment serves traffic. Make sure that your published client is configured with this URL. Do you want to push your code to your production deployment? Yes. Environment variable clerk issuer URL is used in auth config file, but its value was not set. So we need to set this up in Convex, basically clerk issuer URL. So it's telling us basically we need to add that into Convex. So let's go to Convex, let's go to settings, let's go to environment variables, let's add the clerk issuer URL. We're going to add this as clerk.scribe.co. Come back to here, save that. Now let's try do npx convex deploy again in our terminal, and that has deployed successfully. So now all we need to do is to commit and push these changes to GitHub to trigger a new deploy from Vercel. Let's go back to Vercel here. We want to check that there is a deployment happening. So this deployment is now happening here in Vercel, and then we're going to go and create a new account in our app. Now that we've got this environment variable set up here, we can have a look at the logs here as well. You can see these failures which were happening before, basically, which was to do with Clerk not being able to send the information and the webhook failing with Clerk. So we're just getting all these issues like tied up before we can actually get people using our app here. So now that's deployed. Let's go to an incognito window here so we can create a new account. Let's try creating a new account here. Let's create a new account on Scribe. And what we want to do here is we want to check that this will allow us to create an app. So let's call the app Scribe. And what we also want to check now is that let's have a look in the console to see what happened. If anything happened that's wrong here. So creating a worker, there's an issue here still with this to do with Cloudflare. Let's log into Convex. Let's have a look at our project in Convex, and let's go to the logs and just see if anything has happened here. So it looks like a bunch of, this is for the development one. Let's move over to production. Let's go to the logs here. Looks like something is happening successfully. Let's look at data and go to users. There's still nothing in users. Let's have a look in Clerk to see if users are being created here. So users are being created. Let's go to the webhook section and just see what is happening here. So we're still getting failures on this webhook. Okay, so I figured out finally what the issue is, and it's taken ages, but I figured out what finally the issue was with getting basically Clerk to create the user in Convex, and it was that I didn't have www on the webhook URL. So I've updated all the webhook URLs to use www, because Vercel was redirecting from scribe.co to www.scribe.co, and that was causing a redirect issue. And I've also updated the Polar webhook URL here. So that is basically what is causing the issue here. So if I refresh Clerk here, you will now be able to see, hopefully, if we go into this webhook, we've got successful webhooks happening and users are being created in the database on Scribe. So let's go through using Scribe, the deployed version, finally, and actually create an app here and check that this all works. So let's do Scribe. Let's do a web app, and let's skip and create this. Let's create that. We now have created our app. We have our application live. We can add our tech stack in here, add knowledge. We can click this to get the AI assistant upgrade to Pro, which is going to take us to Polar. That is not working working correctly. So now we need to fix Polar here, which is basically it violates content security policy. So again, we're going to have to do some stuff with the content security to actually allow Polar, the Polar checkout to work here. So let's go back to Claude Code, clear this, and let's say the Polar checkout is not working correctly in production with this error message in the console. Help me fix this. So basically, I think there's been a bunch of things that have happened here related to the content security policy, which we got basically Claude Code to review and add in a bunch of stuff to allow or not allow certain URLs. So it's basically going to add like this URL by.polar to the allowed list of URLs here that in the next config, and that is basically what's going to allow Polar to hopefully actually work here. So now it's made that change. Let us get it to commit this change and push to GitHub so that we can trigger another Vercel deploy and we can check that this works in production and actually trigger the Polar checkout here. So we've committed that, pushed it to GitHub, that is updated. We've got our app here. Let's go back to Vercel. This should be triggering a deployment here, which it is. So we can see this, and when this has loaded again, we're going to check this is working. We're going to open up a new incognito window here and go to Scribe, and then we'll just log into that account. So here's Scribe. Let's log in to this account. That has now deployed our app, so that is live and working. So let's go to it. I'm just going to go into Clerk here quickly and delete these users so we can sign up again. I'm just going to delete this user. So let's sign up with this user again and go through and just check that Polar now works in our app as well. So let's go to sign up. I'm going to refresh this. We're going to sign up. And this deployment part is really one of the hardest parts often with vibe coded apps. It can just take a long time. We had that, so we created our account there. I'm going to go back to Convex just to make sure this has been created in here. So that has been created as a user in our app, which is great. Let's create a new app. Let's call it Scribe. Let's go as a web app, continue, skip and create. Let's create this. And now we're going to click upgrade now. And we're still getting an issue with Polar here. So we also need to add this to our secure content policies. So we're now getting this error with Polar date to fix this. So again, this is just another config issue. We're going to update this and then I'm going to reload the app and try again. So Claude Code has made this change and added that URL to the list of allowed URLs. We're going to go back to the app now and I want to click on upgrade again, just see what happens. We're still getting content blocked. Let's go into here. So again, this one is now being missed from that. We need to add that as well. So we've updated that again to allow even more URLs from Polar for this to work. Let's click upgrade and see what happens. So now we are getting the payments from Polar. Scribe tests needs to complete their payment setup before you can make a purchase. So basically there. So if I click upgrade now, we are getting the Polar checkout here, which means we can pay and subscribe. Now it says that Scribe test needs to complete their payment setup before you can make a purchase. You can still test with free products or 100% discount orders. So this just means I need to complete the payment setup in Polar. So we can go into the Polar dashboard and figure out the final setup there. But essentially we've got everything set up here and deployed for our app built using Claude Code. We had a bunch of issues in the deployment phase of this, but we worked through it eventually, used Claude Code to actually build and deploy our app. And that is the end of the app building tutorial here to build an app with Claude Code, get it deployed using Vercel, and use Clerk and Convex for your database, backend, authentication, and Polar for payments. You made it to the end of the build. That is the full app build using Claude Code. Thank you so much for sticking through the whole video if you've got this far, and I hope this helps you in your app building journey with Claude Code. Figure out how to set up Claude Code, how to use the Claude Code extension, how to use the terminal, and how to start building your application using the most powerful coding agent in the world right now in Claude Code. And I do just want to take a moment to say, if you are building an app with AI or this has helped you get started, but you want to take it to the next level, I've got a community helping people turn their app ideas into real businesses over at school.com/AI apps. And you'll learn a ton more than just how to build your app. You'll also learn how to build a business around your app, how to design your app in the right way, and then how to launch and grow your app using proven strategies that have worked for hundreds of other startups. apps. Plus, you'll also be able to join over 200 other people who have gone through the same steps and are on the same journey as you, who can offer you support and advice and answer any question along the way as you go on your app building and AI coding journey. Again, thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. If you have got this far, I massively appreciate it. I know it's a ton of time, and I really hope that this has helped you to actually build an app and get it launched. And if you do want to see more content like this, just like and subscribe on the video down below. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.
Build great product. Build great product.